What is going on, everybody? Patrick Connor here, and welcome back to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. We have a special show today because, look, we're kind of melting this history sphere that Aris and I have going on with also, I would call him a guest, but it's almost like Gray Johnson of BoxRec here with us today. He's actually a co-host. It's just the only co-host once a year.
This is my third appearance. I have a three-timer, so I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
It's been a little bit, but thanks so much for coming back. And Eris, as always, dude, thanks for taking the time, bro. We're talking video games today, man.
Oh yeah, I'm very, very excited about this one, guys. This is an idea that we've all had coming together for a few months now. We talked about it. All of us have had a chance, me and Gray. You and I got a chance to be playing a bunch of them in Canastota and like have a trip down memory lane during Hall of Fame weekend. And yeah, it's just boxing and video games have always just kind of gone hand in hand ever since. Well, I mean, shit, what? Um, Atari?
Oh yeah, even before you could say even before then, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I played quite a few in preparation for this episode and took some notes. So I'm very excited to kind of go through the history of gaming with you guys.
I think that it's going to be more and more clear the more we talk that you guys are far more experienced playing video games in general and boxing video games. Because I mean, like, I just turned 42 a couple months ago, which puts me a couple years older than you guys, but also right in the range where like I started kind of like getting away from video games, not because of age necessarily, but just more interest. But I know you guys are far more up on like the more recent games. However, there are a whole bunch of games from like probably like the 90s and early 2000s that thankfully I can definitely get into this conversation with.
Mhm.
But even going back, like Era said, there actually is, and obviously we're very history slanted, but there really is kind of an interweaving of when video games entered the conversation in like, the 60s and 70s ish. They hopped boxing pretty quickly, and it makes sense that they would. Boxing's fast paced, a lot of action, keep your interest. And also, I think one of the points of video games when they really started pumping them out and like, coin operated video games obviously was for the people to make money. And you could just constantly have like a fight and a fight and a fight and fight and stuff like that. So, boxing really has been at or near the forefront of a lot of really popular video games for, since the 60s and 70s, really. But like officially, as the whole video game thing, I think mid 70s is what we're talking about, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm looking at my vast spreadsheet of of games from the 70s. So I did try and play, like I said, a lot of older stuff. So I will apologize. I didn't play like a lot of the super older stuff, but I know for a fact there's a game called there's an arcade game. Let me find it. I just had it and I lost it. But well, there's 1984's Champion Boxing for Sega, which I believe came out on, I think it was part of like an arcade release, I believe.
I
Uh,
played that
there's
as a kid. I
uh,
definitely
there's
played that when I was a kid.
there's one on the Atari 8-bit called Computer Title Bouts, which is from 1983. Which again, I mean, you can imagine what you can look it up. The graphics are incredible, but it's just mostly names of fighters, but they didn't use any like they didn't get the rights to anybody at that point. But the one I was thinking of, I apologize, Heavyweight Champ, 1976, an arcade machine. So I think that might be one of the earliest examples of the pre home computer gaming era.
It's starting the long video game tradition of the game looking super badass on the fucking like console, but
Yes.
then like you look at it and it's like 3 pixels fighting 3 pixels, and you're like, oh shit.
A lot of great box art on the side of the arcade machine, right? That look, you're like, oh yeah, this could be so cool. And then you look at the screenshots and it's oh boy, it's dated.
Fights are like click up, click up, click up, click up. You're like, oh
Yeah,
shit. Oh, all right.
yeah.
This is
But
even
that goes
before
for
the
every sporting game back then, really, when you think about it. Like every arcade game back then had like a really cool base where you see it and you see the graphics, so whether it was that or a fighting game or soccer or some shit that you were gonna play and you get excited. And then the same thing, you would get there and it'd just be like blips and just clunks and I don't know. The boxing games sometimes were fun. There were a bunch of them for the arcade back then, but like I do remember playing one that like I got in tr I don't even remember the name of it. It had to be one of the ones you just after mentioned. You mentioned Gray, but like I played that for at least an hour in the arcade before I even got into boxing, and that thing actually held up the entire day. Like there was a whole tournament in it, and guys
Mm.
with these little afros, other thing built up. I mean, it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I said, it's my bad. I did not dive into the Atari era, so apologize. There's also I don't want to also forget for the Atari 2600, a game called a game simply just called Boxing from 1980. So again, looking at a quick screenshot of this, it's just basically kind of like one fighter that is in white and another fighter that is in black, and they are just two long arms with boxing gloves going back and forth. So it's very minimalist, but back then that was considered, one of the I think it was one of the first games actually developed by Activision, which obviously ended up making a ton of different stuff back, you know, one of the staples of the Atari back in the or in 1980. But that's what they had.
I mean, it's funny because you go back about 10 years before that even and you get to the Rock'em Sock'em Robots era, which I know is not a, technically a video game, but it's obviously like a predecessor, and you could obviously also see why boxing as a medium would work so well for a video game, overall, which it still does. It's still people are still frothing at the mouth anytime a halfway decent boxing video game comes out. I often see that like boxing apps, and when it comes to like the game section of like the App Store and stuff like that, are often fairly high up in the ranking for downloads and shit like that. So, it makes sense why people would want to do boxing on a video game. But going from like the 70s to the 80s, that's obviously when it started getting like more fun and more like it
Yes.
wasn't just like a bundle of, bits and shit like that, allegedly fighting one another or striking one another, but you could actually kind of like see a little bit of a story. You could see a little bit of, a cartoonish fun happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could point to the Punch Out arcade console coming out in 1984 is kind of the beginning of that. Obviously we'll talk more about the NES version, but that's where you kind of begin with the concept of Little Mac. He's the green see-through fighter, and then you have that iconic view is your fighter's back is to you with the fighter in front of you that a lot of games would copy. And then you start to get like you said, the kind of the cartoonish representation of fighters such as Glass Joe. I can't remember I think there's one guy named Pizza Pizzazz or something like that. Obviously some ridiculousness in that game. Mr. Sandman, I think, is the final boss, but that game kind of kicks things off, I think. What boxing games could turn into. I mean, yeah, Punch Out really kind of kicked it off for sure in 84.
Yeah, I don't that's too like 84 is too soon for me to remember, at least not in the arcade. But obviously, like many people right around my age and our age, I remember like I've mentioned this before a couple times on other shows, but doesn't really matter because we have return listeners and viewers, but we also have new listeners and viewers. So I'm not going to all the fucking inside jokes and stories and shit. But there was a round table pizza when I was a little kid that was not too far away that always had the new video games. All of, anytime there were like new cool video games cycling through, they'd put them at this fucking round table and they would get just, probably making buku bucks. Fucking, these kids just pumping quarters into these motherfuckers. But that
Yeah.
being said, also that was kind of where we got the ideas for what the fun stuff was, for what the awesome video games that we needed to try. And when we finally got a Nintendo and stuff like that, and when Mike Tyson's Punch Out came out, my parents used to let us, if we got good grades, choose a video game when we got our report cards, whatever, whatever semester or whatever. And I chose Mike Tyson's Punch Out not too
Oh.
long after it came out, and
Mm.
like on Nintendo, obviously. And so we played the shit out of that. Couldn't tell you how many times I slapped that motherfucker, blew in it, fucking you
Yeah, yeah.
put it in the console and you're going clunk 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 clunk, and it's like, why would you think that would fix it, you dumbass? But we did it. we wore the shit out of that game because it was awesome.
It was. And it's so you had the Punch Out series, which has always been a staple, which is I mean, it kind of is two different. There's always been like, in my eyes, two different types of boxing games that are out there, right? You have the cartoonish version of boxing that's honestly more of a puzzle game. If we really think about it, the puzzle game disguised as a boxing game, the Punch Out series, right? And Ready to Rumble is also kind of cartoonish. We'll talk more about that, but you always have those type of games, and then you have the games that are kind of meant to be serious and a simulation of the sport. And you can look at that as Ring King coming out on the arcade in 1985, so right after Punch Out. So you have the serious boxing game, and then you have the cartoonish, you know, puzzle, fun game in Mike Tyson. So there's always those two options I think consumers have always had. And both Ring King and Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I mean, obviously I think Punch Out sold way better, but Ring King also, I believe, sold over like 250,000 copies on the NES when it came out on console. So both games did pretty well, and I think you could argue that they're both targeted at different audiences, but they can also be played by this. There's also that overlap. I think this boxing fans will enjoy both games, but one's more serious than the other, obviously.
Yeah, Eris, do you have any I think you and I have talked about Punch Out on some other episode, but I don't remember what episode it was. But in any case, do you remember like when Punch Out came out, or was that like a year or two beyond you?
Which one, the Mike Tyson one or the
Yeah.
arcade?
Yeah, Mike
I
Tyson.
mean, I played both of them actually. There was we had a pizza place down in New Bedford. I don't, it's so long ago that I know it doesn't exist anymore. But for whatever reason, years after it came out, so we're talking late 80s, 88, 89, around then, they had the original Punch Out as an arcade game in there. So I remember playing that a couple of times as a kid and being confused because I was only like 4 or 5. What the fuck that green
Yeah.
pixelated guy that I was supposed to be was trying to do that, you know what I mean? So I didn't really get into it, but fast forward a couple of years later when I had a Nintendo and yeah, I had Punch Out just like anybody else, you know what I mean? And me and the neighborhood kids, the funny thing is though, is that like there was always there was like one kid in the neighborhood that was really, really, really good at it, right? And like all of us were like good, but only to like a certain point. Like I would end up getting stuck on the Russian dude who was like doing soda pop. That guy, Soda Pop Popinski. I would always
Yep.
get fucked up on him or somebody else around that time. But there was always this dude in the neighborhood that was just like so smooth with it that the rest of us would kind of gather around and watch him and start cheering him on while he'd be doing it. And so he'd be going there and be like, yo, watch how he's going, blah, blah, blah. And this kid would just be sitting there with the controller and he's going, just like them streaming dudes today when they're playing like I don't know Fortnite or whatever streaming things people can play today. But the kid would just be sitting there and just whooping everyone's ass, all the rematches and everything. But that was an iconic game. I mean, it still is. When I was as an adult, they came back when we were. There's a place called Flat Tops in my neighborhood that no longer exists, but they had an old Nintendo, and Punch Out was one of the games they had. And every time I would be there, which was almost every night, I would just get on that Nintendo and keep on playing it to the point where I got all the way to, I think, Mr. Sandman or whatever it is, the guy right before Tyson. So,
Same. I grew up with,
yeah.
grew up with my cousins having the system, so I go over to their house. It's probably 90, 91. So obviously the game's been out for a bit. But I
Yeah.
remember growing up and we would all take turns, and it was always a big deal if we could get past Mr. Sandman. And none of us, I don't think I ever saw any of us actually make it to Tyson because if you still play the game now, Super Macho Man is a very difficult opponent. Uh, but yeah, definitely one of my earliest gaming memories is sitting around the NES and playing Punch Out over and
That's
over
an
again.
iconic cover too when you think about it. The one of just like, a live shot of Tyson,
It's a
obviously a little
yeah.
fixed up, but it's just a great cover.
Did we
It,
yeah.
go ahead.
Do you guys know about the story about the licensing for Tyson at all?
No.
This is it's pretty remarkable.
I feel
So
like I've heard it, but I
Nintendo,
don't know it.
yeah. So there's a Nintendo executive. His name is Minoru Arakawa, and he's you can look him up. So he's produced an insane amount of games. He's in Las Vegas in 1986 for the Consumer Electronics Show, and Nintendo's showing all their shit off. And I think I'd imagine, he's sitting in a bar in some Vegas casino after this show, and he sees a boxing card on cable TV, right? Matt, remember that those
Mm.
days? And you know what fight he sees that inspires him? Mike Tyson versus David Jaco. And he watches that fight and he goes to his that guy, whatever,
He
other
must have
people
been
with him.
watching ESPN Classic in 2006.
Yeah, I know, right? You think yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right? So he watches that fight and he turns to his other like executives and goes, "I need that guy." Like seriously, 1986, January 1986, he says, "I want that guy for my game." So this is before the heavyweight unification tournament. This is before everything, and they go all in on Mike Tyson. Basically, it's a gamble, right? Because he's not so unproven at this point. But they offer Mike Tyson $50,000 for his likeness, and by the time that game comes out, he's just knocked out Burbick, and he's the heavy, he's got the belt, and it just and it goes from it's one of the most incredible gambles I think you could ever like conceive, that they thought about this nearly a year in advance. So the game just sells so well with the Tyson name on it. And yeah, Tyson, at that, they got him at a point where he was still 19. His name wasn't super valuable yet, but it was perfect timing. So yeah, one of those just incredible stories. And yeah, Tyson, people probably don't realize that Tyson didn't make a ton off that offer. And that's one of the reasons why Mr. Dream ended up coming out on the later versions, because they
Mm.
couldn't. I mean, obviously there was the legal issues, but I think that they, the contract probably only ran for, I think, maybe 3 years, I want to say. And at that point, licensing Tyson was a lot more money, and that wasn't going to happen. So that's why, big reason why those later cartridges have the iconic Mr. Dream on the on the cover.
I did have some friends who were like, I'd be like, "Oh, do you have Mike Tyson's Punch Out?" And they'd be like, "Oh, you mean Punch Out?" And I'd be like, "No, I mean Mike Tyson's Punch Out. You got
Tyson's
Mike
punch.
Tyson." And yeah, and so they had, not that they didn't know about Mike Tyson's Punch Out, but that was just the version they knew because that's what they had.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's the goated game on that system. I played every game on 8-bit, and I think Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I mean, you can sit down and go, "Hey, it's more of a puzzle game than a boxing game." But at the end of the day, it just the controls feel so good. Just
Mm.
the swerving back and forth from the punches, the blocking, everything's done so well. And when you start playing other games on the system, you appreciate it a lot more, and it still has that replayability to this day, as opposed to a lot of the other games that came out on 8-bit we can talk about.
A
Well,
thousand percent. And also too, like I love the insides with like the in between rounds when you get in like the training instructions.
Yes.
And like I do remember one of my best friends made it to Tyson one time, and the training instructions before the fight is you have no chance, you're gonna die immediately, yada yada yada. Just
Yeah,
try to
basically,
hang
yeah.
in there. Yeah, like it was perfect.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to add too is that that game is worth a fuck ton of money now when you think about it today. Like if you
Mhm.
find one of those mint copies that go out there,
Oh yeah.
that's worth. I,
yeah, I'm
it's
pretty
worth an
sure
insane
they
amount.
I'm pretty sure they had an episode of what's it, Pawn Stars, where
Yeah.
somebody sold a
Hmm.
fucking copy of that shit, and it was
Most
for,
probably yeah, graded, perfect grade in the box. I'm sure it was just ridiculous
that's,
because
I
again,
mean, yeah,
you know,
I was like 7 or some shit. What the fuck am I gonna keep a fuck? Of course I'm playing it. It's never
Sure.
gonna stay in the box.
yeah,
Excuse me, but
yeah,
yeah, that's it's absolutely nuts. Like you were saying, Gray, about the playability, the gameplay, and the fun and whatnot. It even eclipses some of the shit when they started getting out of 8-bit and going to other consoles. Some of those games and some of the
oh,
engines they were running were terrible.
I find myself coming back to Mike Tyson's Punch Out than I do more modern games. To be honest with you, I really it still holds a dear piece of my heart. But I mean, like I said, I played some other games on the system. We can talk about. I mean, Ring King is kind of interesting because again, it's a more serious game. You could argue, Aris, you love career. We always love talking about career modes in games, but I think Ring King
Mhm.
was one of the first games that you could, obviously Tyson's like is a career mode because you're winning
Sure, because you're
matches, but
walking up. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, but
yeah.
Ring King's one of the first games where you can add attributes to your fighter to make them faster. I believe you can put points into speed, power, and all
Hmm.
that stuff. So I think it becomes a little bit monotonous because the matches feel a little bit the same each time over and over again. But there's little cool things like you have to be a certain distance away from your opponent to throw and land a punch. I think that's kind of clever. Again, this is like 85, 86. It has the icon in between rounds when the corner guy
Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
maybe performing some sort of interesting act on the fighter. That's a running joke in the video game community. I believe it has punch stats as well, and
That's
it might
cool.
even have round scoring. I can't remember, but I know it's one of those games that I was like, man, I was a it's to me it's like a perfectly, I don't love the game, but I respect what it was. It's a perfectly replayable game. Again, it gets a little bit boring and repetitive, but it's a it's a better simulation than some of the
Yeah.
games that come out years later. So I want to give Ring King a little love. And there's a game called World Champ as well. That's exactly like Ring King. It's just reskinned with like a more modern feel. So that's also on NES. If you want to play that as well, I want to give that a mention. But it's literally just Ring King that looks a little bit better. I was like, man, I'm surprised that back in the day you could just literally remake games with another studio and no one no one got sued. Like it's
Yeah.
literally just Ring King. And then obviously got to shout out the Rocky game for the Sega Master System as well. As a kid, I didn't
Did you
realize
play that?
I did.
Okay.
I had no idea. I don't know about you, Aris, but when I was a kid, I didn't realize Sega like had an 8-bit system. I just thought it started with Genesis.
So did
So,
I. Absolutely.
so as an adult, that blew my
Uh,
mind. I was like, wait a
I
minute, Sega,
our
Sega?
neighbor had one, but
Really?
nobody, but he never played it, and we never played it because we always played Nintendo by the time Nintendo
Yeah.
came out. So
mhm.
like, I knew of Sega, but but we had an Atari when I was really
Okay.
really little,
Yeah.
and so we had a fucking Atari, and by the time Nintendo came out, that was the coolest thing. So nobody
Yeah.
was playing
I
anything else.
all my friends had Nintendo. I barely knew what Atari was, but yeah, Sega Master System was not something I knew was
Yeah,
like
I mean, but that took
really
me
near my life.
until way until I had a Sega when I found out there was like I literally thought like you, Gray, that it came out Sega Genesis, then Sega CD, and then so
Yep.
on and so forth after that. You know what I mean?
So I
And
played,
but
yeah, yeah. So the Rocky game for the 8-bit is not a bad game. I actually like it a little bit more than Ring King. It's because yeah, it's like more of a button masher. But I just love being able to play as Rocky. And what's kind of
sure,
fun about it is they have little mini games in between the fights. It's a fairly short game, so you literally your first match is like it goes like Apollo, Clubber, and Drago. Like that's it. It's 3 levels.
yeah.
And I was able to beat it on the first playthrough. So like it's not that hard, but it's a fun little button masher. Definitely if you can find it out there, it's a fun game. It's not super hard to play, and like the punches, like it is what it is from back then. Like it's a little bit weird, like the controls and the punching, but I thought it's a well-made game. But I think before we go to 16-bit, Pat, I wanted to talk about two games on the 8-bit that I found to be atrocious that I think we need to discuss that just get under my skin. The first being, guys, Power Punch 2. Do you know about Power Punch 2 at all? Or, Pat,
Nah.
any?
That sounds super familiar. I'm about to look that up now, but go ahead.
So Power Punch 2 is what Mike Tyson's Punch Out sequel was supposed to be. And it's by an Australian studio that I don't think they knew anything about how boxing worked. But the idea of the game was that it was supposed to be Mike Tyson and Don King go to space because Mike Tyson has beaten everybody on Earth, and now Mike Tyson is going to fight aliens.
Fuck, that sounds awesome.
It does.
That's yeah, in
The
theory.
premise is great. It's fantastic. He's going to fight aliens, and and at first when you see like the game you see the game footage, you're like, oh my god, it's Mike Tyson's Punch Out. But instead of kind of swerving left and right, you have the whole screen to kind of move back and forth. So it's a little bit, so that's kind of innovative. Then when you play the game, guys, the controls are awful. It's honestly one of the worst NES games I think on the system. Not even just boxing, like on the system. This game just sucks. It plays bad. It's really hard to figure out. The aliens are just impossible to beat. It's just a miserable gaming experience. So it's called Mark, and instead of so of course Mike Tyson, by the way, they can't get him licensed because he ends up going to jail. So that's a problem. And instead they call it Mark Tyler's Punch Out. Sorry,
Jesus.
Mark Tyler's Power Punch 2. So they changed. So you can somewhere you can find the original like demo version of it where it's Mike Tyson, Don King likeness and all that. But then they change it all obviously. But yeah, the game is awful. I don't think most people know it even exists. So, but I just want to shout it out because it sucks and it's a bad game. And then to make things worse is that same studio. So basically, George Foreman gets a deal with Acclaim, not around that same time, and
Mm.
The problem is that Acclaim farms out all of their production to other studios. So we get on the 8-bit George Foreman KO Boxing, which is just a reskinned version of Power Punch 2. It's the same game. Now they've just created. Now it's George Foreman, and instead of aliens, you get fake boxers that all have kind of like Mike Tyson esque, Punch Out esque like personalities, but they're not very
Hmm.
charming. And also, you can no longer move across the screen. You're back to the kind of the Mike Tyson Punch Out esque swerving back and forth. Here's the problem: nothing can be timed. You can't time these guys. Also, the punch. If you get hit by one of these punches by the AI, you're done. See you later. You need to be able to block everything. I can't get past the first level. This is like the test. If you cannot get past the first level of a video game, it is trash. And I am not the only one out there. This game, I wrote in my notes, Antichrist. I hate George Foreman KO boxing. It's even worse on the there's an NES and an SNES version. I think the SNES version is even worse. It's awful. I hate
That's the
this
one that
game.
I knew.
I had
It
the Sega one.
sucks. It's so terrible. I just
Yeah.
needed to get that out there. It also, isn't that the game that has Doritos branding all over it too? Just I started to ramble, but I just hate this game, and it needs to be put out there. This is probably the worst boxing video game, George Foreman KO boxing.
I'm actually surprised, though, to be honest, thinking back on it, right, that Tyson was the only fighter back then who got a deal, basically, to have a licensing deal for a game, like with his name on it. You would think with the popularity of Sugar Ray Leonard, or even let's say Marvin Hagler back then, because Hagler
Yep.
was doing everything and appearing on a lot of different things, that they would have gotten some kind of Nintendo deal. I mean, other athletes with less accolades got games back then, so looking
They would
back, I'm kind of
only
surprised.
they would only get those two would only be licensed to their retirement, which is wild.
What'd you say?
Both
Yeah,
Leonard and Hearns or Leonard and Hagler would get licensed, but it would be well into their
yeah,
retirement.
into retirement. Yeah, I'm surprised
Yeah,
they never had a game made after that. Like I totally could
agreed.
see a Marvin Hagler Nintendo game or Sugar Ray Leonard back then. But
Absolutely.
yeah, that touch on that Foreman game. I had it for Sega, and that still stands out. I tried playing it as an adult a couple of times when I like rebought a Sega and they had that game at a store one day. But like, it
Yeah,
stands out still as one of the hardest games in history. It
it's
is
so hard.
absolutely impossible. It is ridiculously impossible. The first guy is some weird Rocky Marciano gargoyle looking clone, like you said, just a brute with no charm on it. And you can barely get through him because they make that game so fucking hard. I got through him like once or twice. You get to the next guy, he knocks me the fuck out. I go back to the first guy, he beats me in a rematch. I don't even know what the third guy ever looked like. I've never made it to the finals. You're George Foreman from the beginning, but he's just like a sack of dump that gets pounded on from beginning to end. It's impossible to play.
Yeah, it's they try their best with the Tyson where your opponent's throwing combinations that in theory you're supposed to be able to memorize in time, but and
And
Foreman
you
is
couldn't
just
block either. Like I would try to block
no.
and everything would just not work. He was over there to boom,
Blocking is
boom, boom, boom.
blocking you get punished for blocking in this game, which again is a
Yeah.
big red flag for me. Blocking and defense is something that's so important to me in a boxing video game, and if you cannot do that correctly, your game belongs in the dumpster. It belongs at the Kmart $2 rack. It belongs in the KB Toys. We're getting rid of this section.
I
No
think it
good.
ended up probably going there eventually. But that fucking
Yeah.
game was advertised in wrestling magazines, I remember as a kid, boxing magazines, obviously, and all over. And they would show you all the different consoles you can get it. And it was a cool cover because it was Foreman there at his absolute early 90s best, arms crossed, smiling, and just whatever. But
So I think that wraps up 8-bit Pat. I think we can all agree
word
Tyson's
up.
Mike Tyson's Punch Out was the goat of that era.
Yeah,
So was Busted? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Pat.
I was just gonna say, like you said, is almost kind of like a game where it's not so much about like an actual boxing or fighting game per se, where you're having to kind of like remember specific combinations and sequences of shit. But that being said, it's still so fun. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It's got to be the best.
absolutely. But I know,
So, oh, go ahead. I'm bad.
no.
I was gonna ask, bro, like, would Buster Douglas's Sega game, would that be the first one for Sega that like actually licensed as actual boxing game
I believe
besides the
so.
Rocky one?
Yeah, I believe so, and I think that's kind of so I forget what the game is called in Japan, but basically, yeah, Sega had this game already made in Japan, and I think the idea was it was supposed to also be a Mike Tyson licensed game, but as we all know, he gets knocked out, and there's a big problem, and they decided to go with the hot hand at the time, and we get Buster Douglas knockout boxing, and oh boy.
That
I
seemed to
threw,
be kind of the recipe for what happened with a bunch of these games was they would have like a skeleton of a fucking game,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
they would just be like, all right, what fighter can we talk to get like, and yeah.
Can we like just quickly throw we'll just
Yeah, who's the
quickly
fighter du jour? And Buster
s-
Douglas was so short that it was like they're,
yeah, we need to
fuck.
throw slap together a quick design. Here we go. And man, the game, I don't know if you guys have played it recently, but holy shit, does it feel like an unfinished product that they just, again, this is what they did back in the day, right? They just slapped whatever crap they couldn't throw it on the market. But this game was the unfinished. I mean, my notes I just wrote, controls just feel bad. The AI is just insanely stupid. And at one point, I just pressed my little fighter to come forward, and I just trapped the AI on the ropes, and it just sat there as I just pound, 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 pound. Like that's how I won one of my matches. I'm like, this is just shockingly dumb. And then the game becomes extremely hard and impossible to beat, just like pretty much every video game of that era. But that game is just remarkably bad. I wouldn't call it as bad as George Foreman KO boxing, but just don't play it. You don't need to play that
I
game.
I remember enjoying it as a kid because like it was a fun for back then. It was fun for what it was. I didn't think the graphics were too bad either. Like the guy that they tried to make Buster Douglas, kind of sort of. I mean, everybody had the same body build where they just
Yes.
absolute ripped Adonis. But I
Yeah.
think like
The
totally,
sprites were wild. The sprites are
yeah.
wild.
Those dudes were huge. And I remember that the final boss was a guy with headgear of all things, wasn't he? Was he like Ironhead or something was his
I
name?
think yes, yes.
Yeah.
Ironhead was the name of the final boss. I never.
But
I've seen the footage. But, yeah, kind of absurd.
it was one
Uh,
of those games I used to rent a lot as a kid from like RX Place or one of those random places that would have the places
mm.
that you wouldn't expect to have a video rental place in the back of it, but they would, and they would have the most unexpected and best video games too. Sometimes the
Absolutely.
best. And that was one of them. They had Busted Douglas boxing, and I rented that like 3 or 4 times as a kid.
That was
But
the quickest way was just to go to whoever was the hottest heavyweight fucking thing at the moment was just go after them.
I mean, Tyson fucked up a lot that year. He lost that bag. I don't know how much that game made, but whatever money it was. And Saturday night's main event when he was supposed to be the referee for Hogan against Macho Man. And then immediately after he got knocked out, they're like, "Oh, put Buster Douglas in there." So
on the other hand, you could talk about a game that was licensed with another fighter that actually was good, and it gave birth to better games from that. It was Evander Holyfield's Real
Yep.
Deal Boxing, which comes out
Yep.
in '92 from a company called Acme Interactive. And I wanted to learn more about them, and I was very pleased to find out they made a predecessor called the ABC Wide World of Sports Boxing for PC. Now, I didn't get to play this game, but I watched videos of it and did some research, and it's actually a pretty cool game. Like a deep career mode. They even have like managers that you can hire and stuff, and they're all like really sleazy
I've seen it on eBay.
cartoons. Yeah, it's a pretty deep game for 1991. So they took a lot of that concept and was able to move it to the SNES and Sega. I believe actually I think it's Evander Holyfield, just Sega only. I apologize, but they were able to move it over to the Sega game. And yeah, Evander Holyfield's game is like the first one with like a real career, like I think a really well done career mode. Whereas your fighter actually ages and like guys go up and down the rankings. Like there's a lot of cool concepts that other games would end up taking. But yeah, that game just like, the defense really works well. It's a little, we'll talk about the better game that comes out of it because there's greatest heavyweights, of course, kind of comes out of that game. But it's still, I want to give it a lot of credit because it gave birth to a much better game. But it was like, oh, this is what boxing games can be. The defense can matter and, a good career mode. So shout out to Evander Holyfield.
Yeah, the especially compared to like George Foreman and Buster Douglas. I mean, yeah, I can't lie and be like, "Oh, I was anticipating," because I wasn't into it to that point or like at least not boxing to that degree. So it wouldn't yeah, I wasn't like, on pins and needles waiting for it, but needless to say, the Evander Holyfield game, the Real Deal Boxing, was so much better. I mean, it almost might have suffered in terms of popularity or sellability because of how bad those other games were that came out immediately before it.
Right. Yeah,
also, go
exactly.
ahead.
No, if you played Buster Douglas KO boxing, you're probably like, this game can't be that good. You get burned once.
It came out in a really good time where back when we were kids, you were playing basically every game that was out there, whether you were a big fan of it or not. Like whether it was football,
That's
basketball,
true.
tennis, any type of sport. Like if it was a Sega console, and say you were at school or say you were at your friend's place or whatever it was, like you were playing a variety of games, just all different types.
It's
So
true.
that Holyfield game got passed around a lot to various kids, whether you were a boxing
That's
fan or
and
not.
borrowing games. That's true
Yeah,
because that's another
absolutely.
fucking thing that we always used to do
So,
is motherfuckers were like $65 a piece, dude. You have to borrow that shit out.
and it's perfect for us because soon after that, like you said, Gray, you had Greatest Heavyweights, and soon after, Boxing Legends of the Ring that came out soon after that. But like,
Yes.
there's just, it was a good time to be for boxing in terms of video games because of that boom of the era of Sega and Super Nintendo where they was churning out everything. And if you were popular enough, and Holyfield, obviously not at the level of Tyson, but popular in itself of just, being the heavyweight champion when that still everyone still gave a shit about that. Definitely got a game out of it. And it was a great game too. It wasn't like one that was unplayable.
It's wild too because Muhammad Ali heavyweight boxing comes out like right around that same year as Holyfield's game does, but it's way worse. Like the graphics look like it should be on 8-bit and it doesn't control very well. I wouldn't say it's a horrible game, but it's thoroughly mediocre. And I would rather pick up a copy of Evander Holyfield's boxing and put like the way that the fighters are the side by side. I really like that as opposed to like this full whole ring and it's just the movement of Muhammad Ali is funky. The jabs look really clunky and weird. The sound is awful. And again, it's an 8-bit game that they dumped onto a 16-bit cartridge and they tried to get away with it. And yeah, it's just crazy that he was the bigger name and the more iconic brand, and he gets the worst game.
Was that even on Sega? What was that
That was
on?
yeah, that was on Sega Genesis, and it came out. I
Hmm.
believe it came out like either
Yeah, I never
before.
had that.
It might have come after a Holyfield game, and it's just like they feel like different generations of games, even though they came out the same year. It's
Who was the
ridiculous.
characters on it?
Um, Holyfield's or sorry, Ali's game was just a bunch of fake.
Oh, it was okay because I know there was like an Ali
Ooh.
opponents game where I think there might have been like
Well,
Chavallo or
oh
Jimmy or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
we'll,
yeah,
we'll get to opponents of
yeah, yeah,
we'll get
yeah.
to opponents of Ali, baby. I played that guy. I got a 3DO. I figured out how to play 3DO on my laptop.
Oh
That took
shit.
some time. But this is a stripped down version of Ali with all fake opponents. So it's not that fun. But I have to give that a mention as well. And I think we got to also talk about Pat before we go on to the good games. Can we just talk about Foreman for real quickly? Another awful George Foreman licensed
Oh
game
my
because
gosh, dude.
Aris played this one too, and we talked about
Absolutely.
this game. This is like 1995 ass motion capture where the head
Mhm.
and the bodies are just looking bad. And it's like, when people, it's like these studios saw Mortal Kombat and they're like, we gotta do Mortal Kombat for everything. Now we gotta do that Mortal Kombat like motion capture with the
It,
faces and the bodies.
and
We
it
gotta
winds up
do it.
almost looking like somebody took a fucking crescent wrench to like
Yeah.
GoldenEye, like the
Yes.
fucking GoldenEye
Yeah.
graphics,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
where
And
they're
they
just like,
yeah, the faces are just everything's kind of squished and weird. And I think for that Foreman for real, they found some guys at a local boxing gym in like Seattle, I think was the story there. So I can't recognize any of the opponents, but they're all obviously fake name fighters. And it's got the same idea. Foreman's back is to you, your opponent's in front of you, but it just plays like shit, man. It's
Oh,
just a nasty video
they
game.
come in like it's you know what? That game almost encompasses everything that was going on in 1995 in terms of mediocrity, right? Foreman was
Right.
the heavyweight champion. WWF at the time was just producing absolute slop. Everything was just pure shit.
Yeah,
Like,
probably the worst year of WWF ever.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
everything was just like going like bad around in general.
yeah.
Except for hip hop. 1995 was a seminal year in hip hop. But anyways, like when you have the guys come out, right? You have fucking Foreman come out in one direction. You have the opponent, like you said, that had this clearly face that was like, scanned or something, put on this weird clunky body. And it's like a cross between uh
I don't even know
yeah,
what
it's almost like a bigger version of Pit Fighter. You know how they would take those guys like
yeah, Pit Fighter. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Pit
like
Fighter with
that's
bigger sprites. Yeah,
exactly. That's what I was trying to describe it, something like that.
yeah,
And they come
yeah,
in different directions, and
dude,
they
it was
meet at
such an
like the center
awful.
like this, and then they fight it out. And
yeah.
I
But
always
They,
thought that one of the guys
oh
looked like
my
Louis
god.
Monaco.
Ah, yeah, it could
Like
have been.
straight up,
I mean, it could have been.
there
Yeah.
was a guy with braids in the back, and he had his face in the same body. I mean, they all had the same body mold, but like,
It's very possible. I mean, like I said,
oh
I know
God.
I know that they scanned all these guys from some gym in like Washington somewhere, so it's not out of the question. But
I asked for that game for Christmas and got it. Yeah, that was my
oh,
birthday, and I just
so sorry.
I played it. I had nothing else back then. You know what I mean? You played what you had to play, but like, yeah, yeah, dark times.
Yeah. Uh, I need to switch gears quickly to a good game, but I don't think there's much to talk about because I don't think it changed. It didn't really reinvent the wheel too much. But Riddick Bowe Boxing for SNES is essentially it's weird because it's two different studios. It's not the same studio, I guess, that did Evander Holyfield Real Deal Boxing, but it plays almost identically to it. I mean, like the sprites, it's just like a bit faster. I like the game more, even though I think more people talk fondly about Evander Holyfield Real Deal Boxing. Like Riddick Bowe Boxing had a very simplistic career mode, but it plays faster. And I think it's a well done game. But again, I don't think most people talk about that game because of Greatest Heavyweights, which came out right after that, which is it's fucking goated. What can I say? It's goated, man.
Is
It's the
that
best game.
is that the first ever like ensemble
Yeah.
like that's got to be that I'm because like they
Yeah.
had a whole bunch of licensed games before that, but I'm trying to think and I can't recall any other game having more than one, licensed character.
I think it came out before Boxing Legends of the Ring. So I think technically, yes, it is the first game that licensed a bunch of people, which was way overdue. We needed it. We needed a game like that, like badly. And they said, we'll give you eight. We're gonna give you eight guys you've heard of, or eight or ten, I can't remember, but we're gonna give you eight guys you heard of, and then we're gonna put some fake characters in there that are clearly based on fighters we could not get. Which I'm
Well,
like, sounds good.
and
Fire it up.
just kind of like rewinding really briefly, like going back to what I was talking about, like Rock'em Sock'em robots and shit like that. There were a whole bunch of like homemade or not homemade, but like home games, board game type of fucking, little things that you could bring that were licensed. Ali, Frazier, a whole
Oh
bunch
yeah.
of them had like a
Hmm.
bunch of those kinds of games. So yeah, dude, it had been forever since you'd gotten really any sort of a board games, like card games, all sorts of shit. So there weren't
Didn't
really any, video games like that.
And
Didn't you show me like a Ken Norton board game once, Aris, or something? Maybe it was Pat, but it was like there was like a Ken Norton board game that was like
they made a
ridiculous.
Ken Norton action figure for
Yeah, I
uh
think that was me. Yeah, yeah.
what I'm looking at, Mego, the Mego figures in the 70s. So they made a
Yeah, the
Muhammad
Mega
Ali
Corp.
figure, and then they had a Ken Norton figure, but they just called him the opponent. They didn't actually give him a name. Just fucked up. But greatest heavyweights, what? That was Ali, Ali, Holyfield, Dempsey, Frazier. So that's four. Patterson was five.
You say
Um,
Marciano?
Marciano six. Joe Lewis was seven.
Patterson, you said already?
Yeah, I said Patterson. Yep.
There's one more and I can't think. Braddock? No.
Holmes. Did I say
Holmes.
Holmes? Yeah,
Holmes.
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 So that's probably like eight or
Yeah, there
whatever it
was
was
eight.
around then.
Yeah, and
And
then yeah.
yeah, that was an absolute classic game. Well, first off, those are the games, that one and Boxing Legends of the Ring that we'll get into are the ones that would like teach. Not only were they fun games, it was teaching me about guys I didn't necessarily know about either. Like
Absolutely.
I had known about Muhammad Ali. I had heard about Joe Frazier because of him being aligned with Muhammad Ali, but I wasn't really aware of him. And the other guys, like Larry Holmes, was kind of active on TV, and my dad was a boxing fan, so I heard his name. But like that game caught me. I had never heard of Dempsey, certainly. You know what I mean? Like or Patterson for that matter, and it starts teaching you things you want to learn about those guys, I guess.
It's the first game, in my opinion, that integrates defense so well into that. I mean, it is a
1,000%.
game where you kind of need to be constantly throwing punches, but at the same time, you kind of need to be on your toes and you need to be really good at blocking shots, especially when you're up against the higher levels of the CPU, because you're going to be in there with guys that are going to be throwing the tank at you, especially as the game gets harder. I mean, that's maybe the one drawback I would say is that the when you're playing career mode, the difficulty spike kind of gets fast, like very quickly. Like it goes from very easy to holy crap, this is really hard. But again, I don't think balance was a concept that most NES games had, so I'm not gonna criticize it too much. But it just does a really good job of introducing concepts into boxing other boxing video games would use later. But yeah, I just love that, body punching really mattered in that game too. Timing of punches and combinations were something, if you could set those up properly, you would benefit greatly and you could beat your friend up if you were able to time punches like those. Those nothing was more satisfying. You agree, Aris, when you're playing that game and a big uppercut just like stuns the guy like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like you and me at the Hall of Fame last year, we were just playing that thing for hours. Like it's just yeah, it's just a great game to just kind of
And
sit back and play two player. It's so good.
you have to develop strategy with it. That was the thing too. Like when
Yeah.
I first played it, it took me at least close, a few weeks or to a month or whatever. I almost threw it out the first week because I was so mad at it because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing and just button mashing wasn't gonna work. But
It's
like,
not a button masher at all.
no, no, like you had literally had to learn a strategy with it in terms of like, jabbing there and especially fighting big guys. Like they made the way that game was made, whereas you had short little ridiculously built just bodybuilders like not Larry Holmes, like Marciano, Frazier, whatever, like the little squat jack guys. And then you had the medium thin build guys that you would have like Holyfield or Dempsey or Ali. And then you had what ended up being the absolute hardest guys to beat was the Larry Holmes build. They were a little flabby, but they were the tallest ones, and they always relied on their jab and right
Carving
hand and
you up
fighting on
with
the
yeah,
on the back
carving
on
you
the outside.
Yeah,
Hmm?
carving you up with the jab. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Calling you a bitch while carving you up
Yes.
with the jab. That's the most
Come on,
frustrating
sucker.
part. Yeah, just you're getting shit talked while Larry Holmes just sits back and jabs you to fucking death.
Hmm.
That is that game simplified. It is, and it's not a game where they don't have combinations that they rely on. It's the AI is just trying to fucking kill you with whatever they have. It's not a game where you memorize things. It's a be on your toes game. And yeah, you got to be moving and throwing punches and blocking. It's a the dark souls of boxing games.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's not an easy game, but it's rewarding, and it just plays so fast. And like I said, I think it's so much better than a lot of the games that comes out like even 10 years later. It's better.
I mean, it's still playable today. And when you do the career mode,
100%.
not only is it like I love the characters that they come up with, like Wild Bill Irwin or who was that the heavyweight that
Big
Corey
George,
was telling us about. Hmm?
Big Ed Rooney,
Yeah,
Donald,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Donald Ghost. Yeah,
Donald
Donald Ghost.
Ghost.
That guy was a pain in the fucking ass too because the stupid mustache, the red hair, pink trunks or whatever it was, but he had the Larry Holmes build and he would just go back and jab your head off. But I like the fact too, I'm remembering now that during the career mode, you would have to like actually pick and choose, okay, do you want to do jump rope for this one or do you want
Yep.
to do power punching to build your stamina or your speed? You want to eat steak for like, your endurance build up or do you want to do that? It was such a great game.
It's simple, but it works well. It's not. I don't like career modes that make me have to think super like hard about what I want to do because I just want to play the game
1,000%.
sometimes. And that's the kind of game where you're like, all right, I kind of want to put points into this, and I know my guy's gonna lose some points here over time. Like it's just yeah, it was well done. Also,
Yeah.
you can make your guy green skin and give him purple trunks and call him the Hulk. That's fantastic. That's good shit. So
Was there any before we move on, was there any like secret codes that we know of in that game? No, right?
not that game.
I mean,
No, I don't.
besides like coming up like Cyborg or something stupid like that, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think I know. I don't think so. Not that particular game. But before we leave the 16-bit era, I think there's one other game, Eris, that we want to talk about. And I wish Corey was here because I think he had a lot of good stories to talk about it. But that was the Tough Man contest. Uh,
Woo! Hell
for
yeah.
for for I believe it's Sega. I think technically it's Sega CD, but maybe it's 32X, so maybe it belongs in the 32-bit
I,
era. I'm not sure, but yeah, we can
I
talk
didn't
about
have
that.
it. It wasn't on CD. I had it for regular Sega. But it
Okay,
was like a
so yeah,
different type of it was a different type of console. Like I had like
yeah.
a shit Pat's bringing out the programs.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. Feeling like Art Davy, baby. I love when Art Davy would walk out on the screen with his mic would fly down. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're gonna have our tournament matchup. And it'd be like, you had to kind of the same idea, like Punch Out like.
Mhm.
Same kind of concept, but um not as good
Impossible.
as Punch Out, but really hard. But it wasn't I didn't hate the game. I don't hate the game for some reason. I know it's hard, but I like it. I kind of like it.
Did you ever play it, Pat?
I never played that one. Nah,
Yeah.
dude. I was gonna say actually for greatest heavyweights, one of the things that was really cool before we get out of the that kind of core group of games was that one of the things that I thought was cool, especially like in the couple of years after that, playing it and shit, was that you could basically play one player and do like a heavyweight tournament type of shit. You know what I mean? Which is obviously not the same as kind of like letting it play out, but nonetheless, pretty cool that you could kind of do a little historical tournament that way. I never played the Tough Man game though. I remember seeing it, but I never played it.
Oh,
I,
it's fantastic.
You know what, like what makes it really nostalgic and endearing is the characters again too. They had guys of like they made characters that totally looked like they would be in a fucking tough man contest. Like they absolutely did. They had the body builds of like heavy dudes with the big guts. They had these little skinny guys that you would see be speedsters in there. Every other they gave them perfect names for all that, and the background like locations for that game too are like were iconic. You know, they had one place that was supposed to like it took place in a bar in Mexico. Another one took place in like a log mill in Alaska, where I could picture like Greg Haugen throwing down back in the day.
Yes.
Like
So
they
you're talking
had
about like actual BKFC venues now.
I mean, like straight
Yeah,
up, yes.
a little bit. They're gonna be coming
And
to the ECW arena in March, so shout out BKFC. Thanks.
me and my bro made it to Butterbean one time, once. And that was hours and hours and hours of playing that game for one day. We're just like, yo, we're gonna make it. And we ended up making it to the bean and all of that work for naught because we got fucking smoked in literally like 40 seconds. He
Well, do you
came
remember
in
how?
there, he snorted, hit us, and we went
Yeah,
flying out of the ring.
do you remember when you get to the bean? What happens? He literally like,
He
do you
climbs out,
remember?
yeah, he comes from the yeah, he comes out of the crowd.
And like throws the referee. He's like, come on, I'm gonna kick your ass. So
It
good.
was bad. We didn't even land a punch. It was absolute, massacre.
But I love, yeah, I mean, it was so good about the game was it used the tough man format, those 3 1 minute rounds, and
Yeah.
it's perfect for a video game. You pretty much have to button mash a bit, but it does have some like swerving back and forth like Tyson, but it just, yeah, it does what the format of the fights were, and it's good for a video game. So
Oh, and it
really,
goes back, we have to mention too, it goes back to the old the very first Punch Out for arcade, where it's you're the pixelated green guy.
yes, it
Yeah,
does.
which is
Does
crazy.
yeah, it does
Yeah.
keep that. Two more games I want to mention before we leave 16-bit. I
Yeah.
apologize. I think we need to talk about one being Boxing Legends of the Ring. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but super important game because it has the Ring magazine licensing. I think that was really interesting for its time. So you're basically moving up the Ring rankings in your career mode. And it was kind of unique because it licensed middleweights. All these other games kind of focused on the heavyweights, but this is a game that allowed, Duran, Hagler, Hearns, I mean, the Four Kings, Lamada, Graziano, I believe,
Mhm.
and maybe I think a Tony, James Tony's in that game as well. And for me, that game is kind of groundbreaking because again, that was when I first started watching boxing, and like you, Grace Heavyweights taught you. That's how I kind of learned about what boxing was outside of the heavyweight division, and I learned what who all these middleweights were. So, Sugar Ray Robinson is in that game as well. I think that's the last guy I forgot, but that game is very it's very fun to play. It's very Mike Tyson Punch Out esque in the sense that they throw combinations at you that are you time, which I kind of like. And it also has super punches you can throw. It's kind of like stars in Punch Out. So kind of a cool concept. You could play tournament mode and stuff like that. So, but I think I would call that a good game and worth checking out if you want to play like a serious Punch Out clone. But yeah, had that
I
Ring
absolutely
magazine
love it.
licensing. Yeah,
And it,
yeah.
it was good and good graphics too. Like it looks like Thomas Hearns. I mean, like it's clearly Sega
Mhm.
pixelated, but it looks like the guys they're supposed to be. It looked like Leonard, it looked like Hearns. Lamada and Graziano kind of look similar to each other, but the whole game works. And I like that they threw James Toney in there because the same thing like greatest heavyweights. They got to put that one popular guy that's like the best in their division at that point in to throw in the game just to keep like, one modern person amongst a bunch of like guys who have
Yes.
been out of the ring for decades.
And they had
38 0-2 Tony at that point. So
Yeah.
he was good.
And he was
they
really good
had
in that game. He was the only guy I was able to beat with Thomas Hearns back then. I don't know why. I
they had
mean, the only guy I was able
finally
to beat Thomas Hearns with.
they had finally figured out the formula too in terms of like the actual graphics to make them not look like they were like fucking melting plastic or something like that. To make them actually look like kind of human. Like I mean, it's as much as you can fucking do with the graphics here. They're going to be really two-dimensional no matter what you do. But given what they had, it seemed like Greatest Heavyweights was kind of like that delineation where they're like, okay, we finally got past the weird looking shit.
And the other game I want to mention, Pat, this might blow your mind, but there was a game for the Forgotten Turbo graphics called Champions Forever Boxing, which is based on the documentary.
Oh shit.
They made a game based on that documentary.
I think that you had mentioned that, or somebody had mentioned that very recently. Because I think no, it had to have been you. It was you because you mentioned it the other day, and you were said something about it. In any case, that was the first time that I had heard. Anyway, I don't remember who it was. Smoked too much weed.
Somebody,
Point
yeah,
is, yeah,
Twitter
somebody mentioned
user
it.
Android Uppercut. Shout out to him for mentioning this game to me. I had remembered about it a long time ago, completely forgotten about it. I was like, oh man, I'm glad he jogged my memory because I would not have looked this game up. But yeah, for the barely used TurboGrafx in 1991, they made a game with Ali, Fraser, Norton, and who am I forgetting? Foreman, maybe.
Foreman,
I forget
Foreman and
Foreman. Yeah,
Holmes.
In Holmes, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and Holmes. It's a game. It makes you immediately want to, once you start playing some of these other games, you're like, I don't want to play this shit. That's my review of it. It's a game. Not memorable, but it's just kind of notable that they made a game based on a documentary in 1989.
Did they? All right. Is it only them five characters, or did they have like is this a bunch of created ones as well? They have to
There's
go
some
through, or
creative guys in there as well. So
okay.
I believe there is a career mode. I did not enjoy playing this game. It was clunky, not very responsive. Had some cool ideas. Had blood, which
Oh.
I don't think a lot of games had back then. Guys' faces would be busted up in between rounds. So when they
Hmm.
like show the stats, I thought that was really cool. You can restore. It would give you the option to either restore your health or boost up the power of some of your punches in between rounds. I really thought that was cool and groundbreaking. But in terms of the controlling and moving
Yeah.
around, it sucks. Don't play it. But
All
it
right.
had some cool ideas.
I need y'all's opinion though before we move to the PlayStation era, right? What's because we talked about Punch Out earlier, Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I really enjoyed Super Punch Out for Super Nintendo when that
That
came
was a
out.
number one. Yeah, duh.
Yeah,
I forgot to mention that. That's number one on my list.
yeah.
I
That's
think that game is goated. Yeah, number one.
Super Punch Out from when like I remember, when Super Nintendo first came out and they have like right on the side over there only for like they would have that little graphic just to be like it's not coming out for Sega, nothing else, like this is our thing. And so that made me want it more and that was the perfect like graphic on the box. But yeah, that game was just incredible, man. It's way over the top more than the original Punch Out was. Like, Punch Out got like the guy that does like the spin trying to do the uppercuts over and over and a couple other hokey dudes, but this game goes over the top and I love everything about it.
It's great. I actually like it more than Mike Tyson's Punch Out. I know that's
Same.
maybe a hot
Yeah.
take, but I think it does the same thing really, really well. Puzzle game disguised as a boxing game, super challenging. Reflex, you need to have good reflexes, man. Especially when you get to that last circuit, it is no fucking joke. That
Yeah.
game is got to get you on your toes. But it's just done, like I said, it's so charming. Gotta love the characters. Rick Bruiser, and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
clown that's throwing shit at you. Love it. It's done really well. But yeah, I feel dummy. I feel
They
like
have a
dumb.
luchador in that game. They had,
Spits
Piston
in your
Dragon,
face.
like all kinds of yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the Kung
It's
Fu dude.
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a good, it's definitely, yeah. I think you talk about what's the best game on that system. I think it's a little better than Greatest Heavyweights because I think I just like it a little more. But I think both those games I'd call goated. And if you've never played either before, go do so because they
Yeah.
are both really fun.
And they hold up. Super Punch Out was
Oh
so
yeah,
fucking fun. Yeah.
Well, I
yeah.
don't think there's any coincidence that some of the best boxing games and some of the most successful ones, some of the ones that are the most fun to play, like embrace the stupidity and like the
Yeah.
outlandishness and like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
caricature type shit. And it's
yeah.
almost like movies, dude. If you take that shit too seriously and it's a boxing movie, it's not going to be good. But if you like try to make it a comedy, try to make it like send to something silly and you're like, oh,
Hmm.
this is boxing and boxing's a fucking joke. So is this. It's okay. But yeah, that's a super punch out. I remember renting that from Blockbuster not long after it came out and being like, "Oh shit." And that was a lot of fun.
Dude.
Yeah.
Especially when you're able to beat a character for like that you couldn't beat. Like it took me forever to beat that. You said the guy that would jump across the ring over and over,
Dragon Lee.
yeah, Dragon Lee.
Or
Once
Dragon
I
Chan.
figured out,
Sorry, not
yeah,
Dragon Lee. Not the wrestler Dragon Lee. Sorry, Dragon Chan. Dragon
Dragon
Chan.
Chan.
Dragon
Once I
Chan.
once I learned how to like duck under his fucking like
Yeah.
sidekick, I was it, man. It was a wrap, and I was hyped.
That's what makes it so. That's why those games are so good because it's a satisfying feeling when you can figure out how to beat the pattern and time
Yeah,
everything. You feel like you're just in control.
1000%. Yep.
That's
The fuck is
so
going on outside? Sorry, someone's like honking their ass over there. It's New York.
New York,
Yeah, I was about to
baby.
say
I'm
it's
just
fucking
saying,
New York, bro.
not getting that where I live. I'm just if a car alarm goes off where I'm like, what the fuck? But yeah,
Fucking
you guys
neighborhood
want to move on
watch and
to
shit.
yeah, you guys want to move on to 16-bit? Got a
Please, yeah, yeah, yeah.
lot of games to talk about there.
Oh yeah, it kind of busted open from that point.
So
1,000%.
I think when we talk 16-bit, you got to talk about Foes of Ali first because it's gonna birth the rest of these games. So when I talked about this, show this game to you guys, I did not remember this game existed for the longest time, and I don't know if you guys knew it existed either, but because I don't think any of us
I
owned a
just learned about it
3DO.
recently myself.
Yeah, so I don't think the problem is I don't think any of us owned a 3DO, which was like $700, and it was a
Oh
basically
shit.
in the disc era. It basically is a 32-bit system in the era of 16-bit. It was too far ahead of its
It
time, too
was it
expensive.
was one of those things where, sorry to interrupt you again, but like it
Yeah,
was
no,
one
it's
of
fine.
those things where like if you had a friend who was like maybe not like rich or wealthy, but like had a little bit of money, they might have had a fucking 3DO, or they might have had one of those, what was that shit, the Atari Lynx. Remember when
Yes,
that shit came
the
out?
Jaguar.
Or the whatever the fucking,
Yeah,
yeah.
Lynx the Jaguar. Yeah, I think
And
both. Yeah, both
my
systems. Yeah,
cousin had that shit and he popped that shit out one day when we were on a fucking trip, and I was like, oh shit, like, and that thing probably had like 12 games total, but still, point is, it's like, Sega CD and all those types
That
of like,
virtual headset too. What's that one with the red awning that that people put
oh,
on?
the Virtual Boy. Yeah,
Virtual Boy.
Some kid brought that on like a bus trip I was on for school. I thought that I thought that game that was
there
revolutionary.
was there was all
There was a
those sort
boxing
of
game
like,
for that actually too,
yeah,
I
there was
think.
like
I don't know what it was,
novelty
but yeah.
type fucking like systems, and that was the 3DO was one of those where like you might have Sega Saturn, shit like that, where you're like,
Oh
you
yeah,
might know
yeah.
somebody.
So
Oh,
yeah, so Foes of Ali comes out for 3DO. I popped this one in because the reason I want to play it is it's made by EA, which would end up going to make the Knockout King series, and then of course Fight Night, blah blah blah. This is kind of where things start. Is it Foes of Ali? So obviously it has the Ali licensing, but it also like Aris was saying before, they license all the guys that a lot of the guys that fought Ali in his career. So I off the top of my head, I remember playing Henry Cooper, Chevalo. I think Leon Spinks is in the game. I want to say that Foreman and Frazier are both in the game.
Jimmy Young in it?
I can't remember, man. I think Norton's in
Jesus.
the game. I
Makes no
I
sense.
didn't get super far in it, but what's kind of so this is not a good. I'm not going to call this game good. I'm going to call it thoroughly mediocre. It's a cool concept. You basically play through the career of Ali. So the opponents are kind of very unique. So for example, when you play Henry Cooper and you start hitting him, he's bleeding everywhere. I think that's really cool. When you play Chuvalo, you can't knock him out. That's just flat out. You can't knock him out. You have to outpoint him over 12 rounds. So there's little things like that that I think are they were kind of cooking on. Decent graphics for the time, but the sound and the control are brutal. The jabs, when you hit somebody, it feels like a pea shooter. It just doesn't feel like the punches are very impactful. Defense feels really miserable. And the default camera was awful. But the saving grace was when I hit the start button, I realized, wait a minute, I can change the camera angles, which was something you could not really do in games before then. So that was kind of like a revolutionary idea. It's like, oh shit, I can change it from overhead to the side. So once I fixed the camera angle to something I liked, I was like, this game went from complete trash to okay, now it's mediocre. I can actually play this game and get past the first few guys now because I fixed the camera angle. But yeah, like I said, it's a game that births a lot of better games, and it's kind of cool for its time. But yeah, again, I think it's a game where it shows you where licensing can go wonders instead of relying on fake characters.
Totally. I had no idea that game even existed until reading about it recently. I love discovering new games or just like discovering things that, whatever, boxing related, and finding out that there was a game that Ali's opponents of like that too that came out before then. And like you don't know about these things. Like how did I not know about that as a kid? But then again, I never had that system. But it's just like crazy. And then you play it now, and of course it's almost unplayable to a degree unless you like, sickos like us who will just, slog through it. But it's just like I don't know. I find that type of shit fascinating. So when Knockout Kings came out, that was what, 97, 98? The first one?
99. 91st was
99.
99.
Wow. Wow. It's crazy. I didn't realize it was that far ahead. But this is the thing about video games too, is that back then I was so when that first, reading about that in what was it, GameStop magazine?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was GameStop and you read about that and you start seeing the different headlines for it. And I don't even know if they really promoted it in boxing magazines because I don't recall seeing like any advertisements in like the late 90s rings. Do you, Pat? Or anything like that? Or any of KO, you, Greg?
No.
Not
No,
really. So
I don't.
just
I know I
go
had
ahead.
2000, and that was right when I got into boxing, and I wish I could
Yeah.
tell you how I heard about it. I have no clue.
Same. It's probably just through like, GameStop and other magazines, but I learned about it and got really excited. And then somehow found out like the roster was going to be on it. Actually, you know what? I take that back. There was one small article where they did talk about the magazine coming out and they showed De La Hoya and Sugar Ray Leonard like posing, wearing whatever they were wearing back then, like getting ready to do shit.
Yeah, was De
But
La Hoya on the 99 one on the cover
yeah,
of 99? I think
yes.
so. Okay.
But that was one of those things back then that I remember, and I guess you guys can relate to this too, is that you pre-order a game, you throw down $15 or whatever it is at, KB Toys, and you wait 3 months for it to come out. And then when it's supposed to come out, you call up that day saying, hey, is the game there? Actually, no, it got postponed 2 weeks. Cool. You call up 2 weeks later, the game come out yet? No, it got postponed another week. And it took almost 3 months, like a month or so before it finally came out. And I just remember being absolutely mind blown because at that time, that had the craziest roster you could imagine.
It was.
Yeah.
Like of every, I mean, we're talking from all-time legends till at that point, guys that you would like head scratchers. Like Floyd Mayweather was what, barely 10-0 when you got added to that game back then. So that was a cool addition. But then you had guys like Carlos Navarro, so
Yeah,
where you're just
yeah,
like, wait, what?
yeah.
But
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of why I liked it though, because it introduced me to like guys like, I remember I had just seen Michael Grant fight Galata and being able to play Michael Grant in a video game I thought was very cool.
sure.
Um, but I think, compliments to EA, I'll give them this, that each game got better. Like, so there's three games for PlayStation, 99, 2000, 2001. And I think you would agree, Aris, I think each game got better and they were really improving the gameplay.
2000 was pretty bad, but like, yeah, they were. I knew where they were going though. I saw what
That was the
direction.
one I grew up with, so I have a little bit of
Yeah,
fondness for 2000, but 2001 is really when they started cooking, in my opinion. Like
agreed.
that game
Absolutely agreed. Yeah, totally.
absolutely cooks. I wrote in my notes for this game. There's so much to like. They kind of had gotten down like how to make the game feel good. The move around the ring just felt really nice. Punching felt really nice. Defense was good. You had slugfest mode where you could just hit guys with low
I remember
blows and
that. Yeah.
headbutts, and there was no rules, which I thought ruled. You could kick guys. Hell yeah. Career mode was really good. Soundtrack slapped. And it was really the first time they integrated the commentary, I thought, pretty well into the game. In the earlier Knockout King games, it's just kind of, I think Sean O'Grady and I want to say Al Albert does the commentary for like 2000. And it's very repetitive, and you want to just you want to mute it immediately. But 2001 has like Teddy, Max, and Al Bernstein, and it feels again, it's not amazing as it's 2001, but at least the commentary does a good job of like actually calling the action, and it's not just random stuff coming out. But yeah, 2001 is when they were cooking, and in my opinion, that is the goated game on in this 32-bit era. Hot take.
Um, I'm trying to think. Maybe you guys can Roger that on me. But like, isn't that which year was it that they had the most guy? What they had the most fighters in? It might have been 2001, right? Like
I
all
know.
top to bottom.
I think I think it had to be 2001 because they
It
had.
was an incredible roster they had. Like Pat, did you play that one?
Yeah, I did. That was the one that had women boxing on it too. Like they had a handful of like contemporary women fighters, 2001.
Yeah, yeah, like Hamlich. I remember specifically was being on that
Yeah,
one.
Christy
Maybe Baby
Martin was
Doll
on it.
Riley. Was she? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mia St.
2000.
John.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think that yeah, because that was on the yes. So it was, I'm pulling it up right now, but yes, correct. Mia St. John, Hamlich, Lucia Riker, Christy Martin, all in that game. So it was one of the earlier games. I think HBO Boxing was the first game technically to have
Yeah,
women, which we'll talk
I,
about in a second. But yeah, I thought that was really cool
yeah,
that
there's like a surprising amount of people. Like, yeah, like you were saying earlier, like you'd pull up
yeah,
the roster and be like, "What the fuck? Why? How'd they get that? What? You know?"
I guess Hamlich is on the cover of the European version of Knockout
All
Kings
right.
2001, which
Let's
is
I gotta
wild.
look up some of these guys because I know they had a random list. I remember Hurricane Carter was in this one.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Um,
I got the list in front of me.
okay, perfect.
Some crazy ones in here that I'm like, wow. Barry McGuigan was in this game apparently. It's again kind of interesting choice. Not that I hate it, but this is when they put Butterbean in the game. Our boy
He was
Ingemar
there from the first one
Johansson.
though.
Yeah, he was
Butterbean
in the
was there
first
from the
one. Good
first, yeah.
point. Good point. Ingemar Johansson, was he in the original? I can't remember, but they threw him in here.
He was there
Shavers.
for a couple.
Ernie Shavers got in this one. This is when they had Obakar,
Yep.
Vernon Forrest, Bronco McCart, David Reed. So a lot of the early
God damn, yeah,
2000s
dude.
staples in this one.
They got
Fernando
Uh,
fucking
Vargas.
Ray
yep.
Mercer, fucking yeah.
Morales and was in the earlier ones. So yeah, they had a couple of good. They definitely had a good roster at that point.
What was the random names though? The ones that you're just kind of like, okay, I know Pedro. Remember Pedro Pina of
Pedro
all people
Pena was
was
in
in one. Yeah.
2000. Yeah, I'm just like
Okay.
scanning through the list here. Definitely Pedro Pena was a WTF edition. I'm assuming he maybe did motion capture or something like that, but that was pretty wild. I mean, this is a good one. Danny Lopez was in 2000. So again, I feel like that'd be for the hardcore fans. So I
Sure.
approve of that one. Uh, Looking
How
quickly
about how
here.
about being able to unlock Joe Macy in 2001?
I want to unlock Joe Macy right now.
Uh,
Yeah, Carlos Navarro was in 99.
Yeah.
Gennaro Hernandez, I think feels like a deep cut, for
He
sure.
was in that. Bob Foster, I think, only made his only appearance in the first one,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, correct. He was
Yeah.
in the PlayStation 1 version. So yeah, Mercer, for sure. Yeah, yeah. So kind of
Okay.
there's some interesting
Can
choices for sure.
can you confirm this one? This one too, Gray. Was Trinidad in like two as like a secret character in like 2000 or 2001?
Trinidad was in 2002 and in 2003. So
But I
the
read somewhere that he was a secret character in one of those other ones. I feel like I played as him, but I don't know if I'm like having a fever dream.
Possible. It's possible. I feel like
Okay.
I'm surprised they didn't put him in one of the earlier versions
That's why I think that like I read he was a secret character along with like Mark Echo or some shit, but I have no idea.
But yeah, I mean the 2001 roster, in my opinion, is definitely like my favorite. Just again, they did a good job with the middleweight, lightweight roster. You got Angel Man Freddy. You can play as Angel Man Freddy. All right, that's crazy to me. You can play as Paul Spadafora. Okay, you can jab all you want with Paul Spadafora. You can play as Danny Romero. They were giving you some guys that were relics of the time. But you go back, I have a fondness because that's when I first started. I don't know about you guys. That was the first time I was really getting into boxing. So a lot of those guys I grew up with.
I mean, same thing. And it again, think of the names you're getting in this game. Like, you have a all like a list of like really heavy history going from Dempsey all the way down to like the current guys from the early 2000s at that point. You know what I mean? From the current guys, and like having all of those at your fingertips to play and just make imaginary matchups back then. I mean, for like a boxing fan, that's like mouth-watering. That was the best shit ever. That's why those games were like are so iconic for me because, and that's why I'm looking to try to buy a PS2 again now is to start playing these games is because like I want to relive that. I want to have like I remember making like David Reed against Hurricane Carter, or having Bulbacar get annihilated by somebody, or do this or do that. Mark Johnson used to be in those games too, or like you said, there was so many different guys back then, you know, and having Ray Mancini and McGuigan go head to head, like basically in this type of war, because you can like mix and match the division sometimes, and the way
Mhm.
those graphics were when they would just like both sluggers go head to head and just going like in a wild like slugfest was the best shit.
So I think we have to talk about HBO boxing now.
I don't want to. Do we have to?
Yes, we do. Now, your Bob Canobio was involved in this game, so I'm not. This has nothing to do with CompuBox or anything.
Well,
I'm
I mean, listen, bro, it's been almost 20, it's been over 20
20 years, so
something
I think
years.
Bob be
I'm
okay.
not, I don't
I'm
think
looking at the
anyone even
credits. I
remembers
look at
that
the
game.
credits, and my eyes wide, and I went, I hope he's okay with this. But no, HBO boxing. I bought this game because that's what I grew up on. My parents got cable. We got HBO boxing, and I watched Roy Jones Jr. against David Telesco in my parents' basement. And I watched that whole show. I watched the fight that got me to get into boxing was Derek Jefferson against David Izon. Go watch that fight if you've never seen it. It's incredible. Yeah, and not saying it's the greatest fight of all time, but it's an incredible fight because of
Both
the
of them
turn
were in some bangers, bro.
bangers. David Izon turns that fight around. And again, dumb me just thinks that's how boxing works. Just one, this is how it always happens, right? One guy can
I
just
mean,
come
bro,
back.
like if you're gonna have a fight that's gonna win you over,
They had
one
won
that's
me
like
over.
fucking Rocky-esque is
It's
right up.
that in it was that in the Roy Jones Jr. entrance in the concert hall. So I want to watch boxing every week. This is sick. I'm all in on HBO boxing. I get the HBO boxing video game. I pop that into my PlayStation, and it's you start going through the menus. You're like, oh my God, I can customize so much shit. Look at this roster. I can play as Monty Barrett. What the fuck? Like, yeah, there's women in this game. Cool, whatever. I can play as Johnny Molnar. I don't know who the fuck that is, but sounds good. Just a
Molnar
random
was in that game?
Johnny Molnar, I believe, did motion capture, so they threw him in the game. But you can play as all the HBO boxing staples at that time. It's just a great. It was a really pretty impressive roster. I know like Foreman's in there. I can't remember all the guys, but it's a good roster, right? And you're like, man, this game is gonna be awesome. It's all the guys I watch in HBO. Then you play that first bout, and then you see fucking Michael Grant come out with arms that the body and the arms don't make any sense. The arms are too long, and you're getting destroyed because the reach on the computer guy is insane. The models are even worse than Foreman for real. The health bar makes no sense. You just get like numbers and they keep counting down as you're being hit with jabs and you're like, I can't get out of the way of anything. I don't know what's happening right now. How do I do anything? This game is so confusing. How do I win? How do I move around? How do I throw up? No, you can't. This game makes no sense. I tried playing it again and I'm just like, I can't fucking understand how this game works. How did they let this go? Like, how is this game released? Because it's like they built it for the boxing fan. Like it is like you get into that guts of those options, and there's so much customization and thought. Like, oh shit, I can turn TKOs on and off, cut stoppages. Like this is awesome. And then man, when you start playing that game, it's just like that's how it feels. It's just awesome roster. Everything looks and sounds like crap, and I remember being so angry as a kid and it still as an adult playing that game. That's my rant. I think that's the worst boxing game ever created. I think it pisses me off just to think about it.
Well, it's especially like a kick to the fucking pants because especially right around that time when it came out, that was when HBO was starting to really pull ahead and set itself apart as the premium boxing fucking network and place to be because yeah, a lot of people did not like at the time in the media the fact that they were snatching up fighters to have as like house fighters, even though that's always kind of happened to some degree, but just not like officially like that, where you had like an HBO fighter. You know what I'm saying? And so that being said, this was around that time where HBO was like, that shit was the premium shit. They were starting to have some of the best original programming on TV. And so that's what the name of the game was all about, was having fucking subscriptions. It still is to some degree, which is why they don't have boxing anymore. But basically, that's why it was such a disappointment. Because you would think that because of the fucking association of the quality and all that type of shit, that it was just, everything about the game was great except the gameplay.
Fucking Acclaim once again.
I can't
Fucking
explain
Acclaim.
how much that game pisses me off still to this day too. Like we all have our gripes about it. I remember being super excited about it because again, like you guys just like you said, a great roster, great everything about it. It's HBO boxing, and then what I was reading about it, people were saying, "Oh, it's gonna be kind of like the first Knockout Kings, except much more enhanced." I love the first Knockout Kings. All right, you're gonna give me a more enhanced version of that, especially because I was a little bit on the iffy side of Knockout Kings 2000. So and then I'm reading the roster and I'm reading about all these different guys who have never been in a game before this. Like Roy Jones was going to be in the game. George Foreman was going to be in the game aside from his other ones. Um, Random guys like Vito Antuofermo, I think was the name that I remember reading, and some others. And I was very excited about it. Right? I pre-order it and Taunton. Remember the Galleria Malgray? You ever been over there in Taunton, Mass?
Yeah, I'm not like
Yeah.
once. I'm a little further there from
But
Taunton, but
you, but you know
I
what
know
I'm
he's
talking about.
yeah, I know what you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about.
But
Yeah,
like, I don't know how I pre-ordered it for like the video game store over there. But
yeah.
we ordered it over there, and me and my parents, we drove over there. I picked it up. I'm the most excited person on the planet. Get home, pop it in, and it was absolute dog shit. I just did not know what I was playing. Again, it was one of those games that like completely like it shouldn't have been released at that point. They had a good concept of what they wanted to do with it, like in terms of ideas, but it was still in its infancy, and they just rushed it out for the sake of rushing a game out, and it was like horrible. Like it's literally unplayable. You know what I mean? Like you go there, you have a guy like Camacho, and you have another guy, and you try to because Camacho was in that game too, I remember, and it's just like clunky, a mess of like 3D. Like Nintendo games flow better than they did. it looked horrible. And
Yeah.
they'll be like, "Oh, your guy got cut
It's
over there. How the fuck would I know he got cut? I can't even
they
tell. His
took
face is
they
just like,
took the like polygons of like fucking Virtual Fighter, but
yeah."
kind of like maybe smoothed them out like a little bit, but they still look like shit.
Some of the yeah, the character models aren't consistent. Some look okay, some are just shockingly awful, and
And
that
just,
just
just the
irritates me.
gameplay of it's like impossible. So I
Yeah.
played it once. I put it back in the package. I went to
Mhm.
Funkoland. Remember one of those places?
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah, that's a deep cut,
Yeah,
right?
that's a deep cut.
I went to
Yeah.
Funkoland and I traded it and I had to give
Um,
them some cash for like SmackDown or SmackDown 2, whatever was out at that time.
Falmouth, Massachusetts, Funkoland. I think that's where I
Yeah,
went to buy shit back then. Shout out to Funkoland. But
sure.
I think we also need to talk about I don't think we need to shit on HBO boxing anymore. Just it's a depressing game. But I also want to mention the often forgotten Mike Tyson boxing. So there's two Mike Tyson games, one for PS1, one for PS2. This is the original one. This was a game with licensed Mike Tyson with a bunch of fake fighters. So again, the concept's really wearing thin at this point because you're starting to get games like Knockout Kings with real rosters. I played this game. It sucks, and I really want to shout out when you're playing as Mike Tyson. You literally are dodging punches like this. It looks like this with the character models. There's lots of stamina and health bars on the screen that make no fucking sense. They went, you know what? Not just one, not just two. Let's put four fucking health bars and stamina bars on the screen. Nothing's gonna be explained. Power, I don't know how you load up for a KO punch, but I got hit by a lot of them by my opponent. I guess you get rewarded if you dodge and swerve and stuff, but it's a nasty game, man. It's a nasty, ugly, cheap looking game. And again, this is at I'm sure Mike was just given a check and whatever studio just crapped this one out, but it's a little better than HBO boxing, but I just want to make sure people don't play that game if you ever see it
I played it.
online.
I
Yeah, it
rented it.
sucks. It sucks. Nasty.
Wasn't that the
Nasty.
same as the Don King? No, no, the Don King game came, I
No,
think,
that's
after
different.
that.
That's different. We'll get to that one too, because
Jesus Christ.
Don licensed the fucking Xbox game too with his
I
with
want
his
to
with
say
his
I want
like
to say the Mike Tyson game though. I remember the one time I rented it because they have a career mode as well. And like you got to get a whole management team, and anytime you fight, like if you win or lose, they do the whole newspaper thing. So and so wins. And I remember after like two fights, I just quit. Like I just I gave up during the fight and quit. And then like it goes to the shit afterwards. It was just like yeah, a has been decides to retire today or something. Like they just completely shit on you, and the game wasn't good at all. But again, that was like during that weird. That was during that weird. It came out on Xbox too, didn't it? Had to have been.
the Don King game or
No, the Tyson one.
I think the second game might have come out on Xbox. I can't
They
remember.
had Mike Tyson too. They made a second one.
Yeah, so they made one for PS1, and then there's a PS2 game that had real fighters that had like Paulo Vidoz, Audley Harrison, Dominic Quinn.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember that because I remember seeing Paulo Vidoz and being like, why the fuck is Paulo Vidoz on this video game?
And the models are terrible looking too. They don't look at all like the fighters. Like Ollie
Of course
Harrison,
not.
the hair just looks kind of stupid and it kind of looks like how he braided it. But other than that, like Francois Botha's in the game, but it's just the models don't look at all like the fighters. It's a very much a rush job. I didn't get to play the second one, so I fortunately can't comment on it. But I mean, they at least tried to license some guys that I'm sure King probably had the rights to at that point or something like
It's
that.
that was during that again. That was during that shitty era where like boxing games were absolute crap, and then
Yeah.
wrestling tried to do like Heroes of Wrestling, and those games were forgettable in themselves too. Did you ever play those?
I did not. I only played WWE licensed products. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, during that whole time though, right, where you had like games that were kind of being shoddy during the Tyson era. You have to remember Dreamcast was out. Sega had their own little side piece over there, and we go back, I guess. I guess that will bring you back to the Mike Tyson Punch Out era because
Ready to
what was that
rumble.
game called?
Ready to rumble.
Ready to Rumble. Yeah.
So yeah, that Dreamcast. I think everyone would agree, or I think the consensus in the gaming community is the Ready to Rumble on Dreamcast is the best version of the game. So naturally, I only played it on PlayStation. So I don't know. I don't know, man. Ready to Rumble. I don't think it's a bad game, but it's one of those games I don't have a particular like I don't have warmness for it. I guess
I mean,
I know
you're
it's
indifferent to
crazy.
it.
Yeah, I'm kind of indifferent to it. So it does the Tyson thing where the characters are they're all kind of goofy, cartoony. They're all very different. So I do appreciate the thought process there. Like how you like load up and get special punches and stuff like that. Good idea. So I don't think it's a bad game necessarily, but yeah, I feel like it's trying to be kind of like it's like a mixture of Mike Tyson's Punch Out, but it's also trying to present itself as more of like it has controls like a serious game. It's weird. It's just
It is a
I don't
weird
know.
game,
It's
yeah.
never really resonated for me. Did you play a lot of it as a kid, Aris? Or
I I mean, I was already I mean,
uh,
I had a Dreamcast, so I played that game. Like that
hell
was
yeah,
I had the first one, and I the only character I remember liking was Afro Thunder. I
Afro
guess that
Thunder.
was like yeah, he was like the main character of the game and the one like the central figure of it anyway. So I guess that would be everybody's remembrance. But I can't recall like saying I played hours of it. I think actually I played more like Crazy Taxi and Virtual Tennis. That was my shit. But like, it was a
Yeah,
fun game though for
I
what it
had a
was.
Dreamcast too. I wound up buying my friend's Dreamcast because like he like didn't play it or some shit like that, and I
Mhm.
loved that shit. And I never liked the way that the Xbox controller felt. I know that sounds dumb and stupid, but like I always felt like, yeah, sounds fucking dumb. But then like the Dreamcast controller, I was like, oh, dude, this is like the best fucking controller. Which is, I don't know, I guess the ergonomics of it, that's kind of a stupid thing to be fond of, but it felt good. And I liked Ready to Rumble was like it was okay, but I I think the note of like like you said, it was like halfway serious, but it was like a real cartoony, and the violence was like Afro Thunder was like sitting there doing this shit and like loading up on bolo punches and shit. It was cool, but Crazy Taxi was the shit. That was the fucking game. Once we figured out you could load up and start going light speed, we were like, oh shit, this is a fucking great game. Like, it went from like, oh, you're just driving around like an idiot to, oh, this shit's a fucking rocket ship. But Dreamcast for that reason was, it was a lot of fun, but not
Did
everybody
you
had it. Yeah.
do you remember playing? Did you ever play the sequel to Ready to Rumble, Pat?
I want to say, yes, because we wound up, what do you call it? Like, I don't know what we called it at the time. It was, not jailbreaking, but my friend found a download for a boot disc where you'd stick the fucking boot disc in the Dreamcast, and then this fucking silvery reindeer would pop up on the screen, and you're like, "What the fuck is this?" And then all of a sudden, you could use all the bootleg CDs and games and shit like that. So he brought Ready to Rumble 2 over one time, and I never really got into it.
Wasn't
I
Michael
thought
Jackson in that one?
I think so. Yeah, I think they got the licensing from Michael Jackson, which is wild to think about, right?
Yeah.
I playing both back to back. I thought the first game was better. One of the rare situations where I think the sequel did not improve on the original. I think the original career mode was better. I think they both have some replayability for sure. You can unlock characters. There's a lot in there. Like there's some meat on the bone. Don't get me wrong. And I think there are people listening that are like, this guy's an idiot. This game rules. Like he's underselling it. So I get that. I know it has a lot of fondness for certain viewers, but I don't know. For me, it just I'm a punch out guy. So
I will
I
say
read
1,000%.
I will say it was kind of cool in the sense that they did start at that point, and I mean maybe they had kind of started with this in some earlier games, but they had started kind of getting a little bit more of like the crowd fun and stuff like that into it, where like the fighters would like do entrances through the crowd, and like like there'd be like people like yelling and hooting and hollering and cheering and chanting and shit like that, and that idea of it was kind of cool. But beyond that, it just I never really got
yeah,
into it.
I understand that. So I think the other thing I want to shout out in the 32-bit era before we leave, there's two games called Contender and Contender 2. I call them Ready to Rumble with less of a budget. Same kind of concept. Goofy characters, very low budget sound effects, kind of feels dull. Career mode not as good as Ready to Rumble, but I do like Contender 2 is kind of a sleepy underdog game. So if you want to give that a rip, I recommend it. But yeah, they definitely don't compare to the original. They're not as good as Ready to Rumble for the most part,
Well,
but I just want to give a quick mention.
also one other game too. So y'all ever play Victorious Boxers?
I was
Oh,
gonna
good call.
say
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Good call. Good call.
that
because
seems to be a
that's
very beloved game in the gaming community
absolutely
too.
a lot of people I talk to about that. Everyone always says that still remains maybe the
Not
best boxing
everybody's
game.
into that style, but the people who are into that style fucking love it.
Well, didn't Knockout Kings almost try to replicate that again, like almost in one of their games? Or am I kind of off with that?
Sounds kind of familiar.
You might
Around
be
the
right.
same time. Yeah. But Victorious Boxers, that's a game that still holds up today. That's a great game.
Yeah, I feel like yeah, that's one I totally forgot about on my list. I thought I played everything, but yeah, I've heard good things about that game.
Yeah, that was early, yeah, around early 2000s when Knockout Kings was coming out with stuff. There was so like Knockout Kings turned into Fight Night in what, like around '03 and '04 or so?
Yeah, oh 03.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think '04 might have been the last Knockout Kings. That was
Yeah,
about
and
GameCube,
then
maybe.
the last it's so like the first Fight Night, I enjoyed the shit out. Again, that was one of those things too that like I was really excited about because it was a clear difference from where they were going and what they were doing. Like that was heavily promoted. I mean, Big Tigger
Yeah,
was
it was
all
big
over
when
it,
it
which
came
is
out.
hilarious.
Yeah, it was
Remember
big when it
having
came out.
yeah. And I mean, I love like I love the game in general. Like that was another one too. Like the that was the first career mode where you actually had to interact during the career thing. Like if you had to pick the thing and do like the heavy bag and learn how to knock that around, or if you're going to do speed, or if you're going to do sparring and all that, or if you got older. I think that game was where as you got older, like your stats would go down with it and stuff. Like it was, a fascinating. It was a really, really good game, and I love the roster of it too. You know.
Fight Night, yeah. So Fight Night Round Two for GameCube. Remember playing a lot of that in the dorm. Hanging out with the little, little water bong and
Yeah, yeah,
some pals, and but yeah, that game slapped. It was all about haymakers. That game was loved. You got to load up on those big haymakers to knock guys out. So that was kind of fun that they added that to the system. And Fight Night Round Two on GameCube came with a copy of Super Punch Out. So that's how I got back into that game. So shout out to GameCube for including that. But yeah, for some reason, that specific game with Bernard Hopkins on the cover, I love that. I love that version of Fight Night. I know there are better versions of it, but that one I love.
Is that the one that everyone talks about where you have to they talk about how difficult it was to like stop cuts and stuff?
Yeah, yeah. Just the game's not easy. The game is not easy,
That's like
but
the memes today where they say like kids today don't understand it when you see it's usually the Hopkins one, right? And he's
Yep.
laying there and
yeah,
yeah,
Well, and I
with the
will say
swab.
that was kind of I have my confession here is that was kind of when boxing video games started to lose me, and it was partially because it was like too difficult, and on top of that, the dudes that I were playing, I'm gonna sound like such a bitch here, but the dudes I was playing with were like competitive, and I'd be like getting my ass whooped, and they'd be like talking shit to me, and like I'm like, so I'd be like not having fun. We'd be like sitting there smoking weed and shit, and they'd be like
yeah.
whooping my ass on
You're
video
like
games
trying to play the
for like
cut man.
4 hours straight. And I'm just like, dude, you guys, I'm like the
Yeah,
boxing guy over here. They're like, oh, what's wrong, boxing guy? I'm like, I fucking suck at video games. What the fuck?
I can imagine you're trying to play like the Cutman mini game in between rounds, and they're just like shit talking. Usually, I gotta get my eyes fucking fixed. Like, yeah,
Fuck,
I
dude.
get that. I get that.
Yeah, that shit was not easy, dude. And you're like, having to, and on top of that, for whatever reason, for me, using the toggle stick was like, that shit was too hard, dude. That shit was kind of tough.
Yeah, they definitely that's the game. Yeah, that they started fainting. Like, there's just a lot of concepts that they start introducing into the game. You're like, okay, this is starting to be like you got if you're not playing it, you're not good at this game. You're gonna get smoked because the guys at the high level are just way too good at this shit.
And
Yeah, and that was what was happening.
Yeah.
let me ask you guys both this too, right? So you're playing a game, and am I the only person? I can't be the only person on the planet that ever thinks about this, right? At least with most boxing games where you can like, like control yourself for if you're going to be on the right side or the left side. You always want to be on the left side when you're playing a game, correct?
Yes.
Is that always
Yes.
like
I
is
hate I hate being on the right side.
right? Okay, I'm
Yes,
not
it's
the only
not
one. I
as
just want to
I don't
make
know
natural.
sure.
Yeah.
why, but yeah,
It's so much more fucking
yeah.
awkward being on the right side, and it always has for every game in history. I don't know why that's been a thing.
I was, what's funny? I was just going through like Knockout Kings 2001 career mode when I was prepping for this, and all the times I was on the left side, and then I switched to the right side for a fight, and I was like, God, I was so angry. Like I don't want to do this. No,
I,
like, get me on the other side of the ring.
Yeah, it's crazy. Even playing, I mean, until Play Undisputed came out recently, I was always playing UFC because I just needed
Mm,
like a fix of some type of combat sport, you know what I mean? And
yeah,
so like playing like UFC 5 or 4 or whatever it is, there's always a tendency, and I guess the AI knows this, that you want to be on the left side. And I think they picked this up over the years because these guys will purposely spin you around and do some shit and get up that they make sure you're on the separate sides now. You're forced to fight them on a different side. And then when I'm forced to do that, I lose. I'm just like, I don't want to do this. And I get pissed off and, and land like a super Bruce Lee kick on them to kill them, to show them my like
It's like
annoyance.
in those
But
games back in the day where
yeah.
like they had the reverse controls, like up was down and down was up, and you're like fucking
Yeah,
like
yeah,
8 years
yeah.
old playing. I don't understand this. Yeah, I hate that shit.
And one time even too playing Fight Night, the last one I guess they came out with, what was that, back in 2011?
The last fight
And
night,
yeah.
yeah,
So
fight
that
night
sounds about
champion.
right.
Yeah, fight night champion. I'm gonna look it up real quick, but yes, that is the last. 2010.
Okay, so like same thing. I was having a really close fight. It was my created character against Chavez for like the championship, and it was like down to the last round. And that motherfucker flipped me around, so like almost the AI flipped me around, so I was on the right side. And then he and he just whooped my ass that last round because I was too like stamina driven to really do anything about it. And yeah, I just wanted to put that gripe out there.
So Fight Night Champion, I think we should talk about because it has a dedicated community.
I was
People
gonna say it's
still
kind of polarizing.
it's interesting because I think a lot of
I
people
love it.
like really love the game. I think other people are like, this didn't, I think maybe they played previous generations, like, oh, this really improve on, but people really do love Fight Night Champion. Like multiplayer, it's still widely like, I mean, I just know people that still play it. It's crazy to me. I, I think what's really great about Fight Night Champion, in my opinion, was the career mode because it was so kind of over the top. I don't know if you've ever played it, Pat, but it's like you play as a fighter named Andre Bishop, and you kind of you deal
Yes.
with a shady promoter. You end up going to jail. You end up having to fight your own brother, and then you have to fight this guy Isaac Frost for the heavyweight championship. It's just so like kind of cartoony. It's like the classic like boxing corruption. But it's actually like it's the first career mode in my opinion that really has a story. Like it has a little bit of meat on the bone to play. So it's not just about the multiplayer gaming aspect of it. There's more parts to it than just that. And like I said, there's so much in that game that the previous generations don't have that I think people still use that now as the barometer when they compare games like an Undisputed. Is it as good as Fight Night Champion? And it's crazy because that game came out like 14 years ago. It's still
Yeah.
being compared.
I never played it, but I had been to houses and like, and stuff where people were playing, and so I'd watched some of it and stuff like that. But the funny thing about the Fight Night games overall is they definitely seem to have their like. So I remember a while back, and this is obviously anecdotal. I don't have any like evidence, or I apologize. My JSTOR fucking study on boxing video games has got taken down. No, I'm just kidding. But that being said, fucking, I remember a while back I posted a graphic with like all of the covers of the Fight Night games, and I remember asking, and I got a surprising amount of responses like, what's your favorite? What's the best one? And there were people in there like trying to like set up actual fights on the street about like arguing which one was the best and shit like
Hmm.
that. People were taking real hard stances. There's some pretty like, uh pretty dedicated opinions when it comes to which
Oh yeah.
fight night was the best and whether or not champion was even good at all, because some people are like, no, it's the best one clearly, and other people are like, are you serious? That is easily the most dog shit fight night. And I'm like, how could that be? It can't be dog shit or the best. What?
I think when
But
you're putting 500 hours into all these games, right, then you start to notice the little inner
that's
workings of it.
probably
Obviously,
true. Yeah.
yeah, if you're looking for that, this is not the show. Go onto YouTube and watch people that multiplayer game all day long, and they'll probably be able to break it down for you. But I just remember as, again, prepping for the show and playing it, I still think the games are fine. I just, I'm sure that, well, four's better because you could do, the meta allowed you to do this, and this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know, man.
I
They're
loved
all fine.
I loved Champion more than anything, I think because of I mean, I love like you said, the career mode was really interesting and all that too. And I didn't even, it wasn't even able to unlock everything in that game. Like, I remember one time if you wanted to get like GL Andre Bishop, you had to have like a Coca-Cola code or some shit like that, and
Shale.
something. Yeah, remember?
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
Andre Bishop with a beard. Yeah,
yeah, the
I
bearded
know
hair.
exactly what you're talking about.
But the thing I loved about Fight Night Champion was the community that would make that would create characters. Kind of like the WWE 2K community, you know? And I was able to like some of these guys were so fucking good at making creative characters like Floyd Mayweather. You can get like a perfect Mayweather from facial to everything all the way down, and the way he fights and the whole thing. And I remember getting like making these like super deep cuts because I would just type in names and there would be somebody there that would make them. I had Jimmy Wild, for instance. I had Baby Jake Malala. I had like seriously, someone made him, and Ricardo Lopez, who I had going through like
Oh
divisions
yeah.
like Manny Pacquiao, Ernie Shavers, Salvador Sanchez, Wilfredo Gomez. Like, the list goes on and on. If you put a guy in, someone probably like created him. And that was my favorite thing about that game was just like making my own roster of all these guys, and people were making really good ones too. Like they took the time and effort to like not only make them facially wise and like look how they would look like
Yeah, but they
the
thought about
fighting,
their
their whole
style and shit.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And if you didn't really like that, I love that you were able to tweak them too into your own ways. So I missed that game for that. It was, that was my favorite thing.
So yeah, I think we need to talk about Don King's prize fighter here because
Let's go,
again,
please.
we
Yeah.
gotta talk. So I want to play. I haven't played this game in a while, and I didn't get to do it for the show. But I want to revisit this game because I want to remember if it was truly as bad as people say it is. Because it came out in 2008, so it came out around. We're at Fight Night round 3 at this point, so the standard of boxing video gaming was pretty high. But I found
Yeah.
it so
Not
fascinating
exactly
that
Don King's heyday either, you
no,
know?
that's what's so incredible is that Don King got 2K Sports to make a game with his fucking face on it in 2008. 2008. The middleweight tournament was done in like what 2001, right? Like
I was already living out here by this time. I didn't even
yeah,
realize it was that
like
old.
that was kind of the descent is happening at this point, and King still is able to get a game, able to get a game delivered with his name on it. And let me just read you some of the names on this roster because this is a 2008 ass roster if I've ever seen one. You got Galata, Samuel Peter, Serhii Lyakovic, Shannon Briggs, Chad Dawson, Enzo Macronelli, O'Neal Bell, Steve Cunningham. So the first cruiserweight division ever in a boxing game. Kelly Pavlik, Arthur Abraham, Daniel Santos, Edison Miranda, Joe Calzaghe is in this game. Ricardo Mayorga, a GameStop exclusive character, and a pre-order skin Mayorga. Yeah, you probably got like the party boy Mayorga with the dyed hair at that point look in
You got to
2008.
trade in Marlboro Miles to fucking get the code from Mayorga.
Roman Karmazin, Andre Berto, Chavez, of course, King was able to deliver that. Luis Colazo, Ivan Kerpa, sure, why not? Then he had all the lightweights at that point. So remember Guzman, Casamayor, Juan and Julio Diaz, Nate Campbell. So he had control of that division. So that's a good roster right there. Chris John is in this game. Okay,
I was
sounds
about to
good.
say, our boy Ali Funeka. Where's Ali Funeka?
Yeah, where's Ali Funeka? It came out. I think it came out a year or two too early for
Yeah.
Ali Funeka, my guy. But he got Chris John, Daniel Ponce de Leon, Elio Rojas, Marquez, Darchinian.
Elio Rojas.
Yes, Elio Rojas. I remember he was with King. I remember he was
Okay.
with King. I feel like he was either WBA featherweight champion or he fought for the belt. I can't remember which, but King had control of Elio Rojas. Then your classic fighters: Lewis, Norton, Holmes, Marciano, Patterson, Moore, Braddock, Bayer. You're like, okay, that makes sense. And hey, here's Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn. On top of that, Don calling up a favor, getting
Yeah,
them in the
dude.
game. But the game, I remember playing it as a kid, not really liking it, and I think that the problem with the game was the timing of it. It was just a game that looked and felt too old. It came out, and again, this was 2 years before Fight Night Champion, and it just felt like a game that felt maybe 5 or 6 years older than that. So I'd love to go revisit that game at some point, not thinking about that context, and see if it actually sucks as much as people say it is. But again, we got to give it up to Don, man, for getting a game licensed when he was not super relevant in boxing at this point, like at all. Like, good for him.
All right, guys, hold up. I just looked something up because I specifically remembered when I first worked at Showtime for a cup of coffee around 2007
Mhm.
that they were developing a video game.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. And so
oh
like
no.
There's a
I
Oh
just like
Showtime
no.
remember
Championship
that
boxing game.
yeah, there was a Showtime Championship boxing game. It was for the
What?
Wii. And
It
like
You didn't
came.
know
yeah,
that,
This is
Greg?
this came out.
I
Yeah.
think it did. I'm pretty
Oh
sure it
yeah.
did. Yeah.
Yo,
You can.
what?
But
Yeah. Yeah. Go look it up.
How did
but
I
here
not
here's the
know?
thing though. But here's the thing. Well, as I looked it up,
Oh
apparently there was
my
a
God.
as I say that though, apparently there was a Showtime boxing game that came out for Dreamcast. I'm looking right now that I didn't even know about.
How in the
They had a few
world
games, yeah.
this
And
came
I
out
didn't know
for?
this, all right, but you want to hear this roster for the Showtime box? Well, first off,
Oh,
though, it says one of the main modes of the game, Best Bouts mode, is a showcase of boxing's rich and storied history, featuring a selection of 5 famous fights across 5 decades. In this mode, players are given the task to reenact them, right?
all
Joe
right,
Lewis, Rocky Marciano, Joe Lewis,
great.
Sonny Liston, Floyd Patterson from 1962, Larry Holmes, Ken Norton. That actually might be
Okay.
fun. Marvin Hagler, Thomas Hearns, and Mike Tyson, Donovan Ruddock, the second fight. And then
All
That's
do you have
incredible.
to mimic all the deductions and shit?
Exactly. Christian Mills Lane barking at you, wherever it was the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, the roster actually sounds really good too. It's
Oh,
kind of
shit.
similar to the Knockout Kings. I don't really see anybody outside of that that wasn't in the original games. Really, actually, no, it's more or less the same roster. Yeah, including Virgil Hill. And then
Nice.
middleweight,
It was not well
um,
rated, I don't think.
no. This looks like it was absolutely horrendously rated. Yeah. It looks like they just took the same guys that were in like the other like Knockout Kings from back then and kind of threw them in this game.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think Razor
But
Ruddock
All right, Jimmy Lennon Jr. is a special character as a boxer.
sick. Uh,
Yeah.
is that Zab Judah in this game? Is that notable at all, or was he in Knockout Kings? I can't remember.
He
I feel like
was.
that's
He was in a few of the Knockout Kings, yeah.
okay.
But
Uh,
there was a Wii game for that because I remember sitting in like in a meeting when they were talking about it. And I don't know what came of it, but yeah,
Michael
Showtime
Moore.
Boxing tried doing it.
I think Moore and Ruddock being in the game are kind of notable as well. Maybe Moore was in some later Knockout Kings or something like that. But I feel like
Ruddock definitely was never in
no, Ruddock feels notable.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. The
Yeah, it
rest of
was
this,
This
obviously, catching wind of HBO boxing or, in this case, a couple years after HBO boxing coming out and them thinking, well, we got to do our own proprietary fucking shit now with our own roster or whatever, which yeah, it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? But it's got a little bit of that whiff of the next great champ versus the contender to it. You know what I'm saying? It's not good.
I can't believe this game came out. This is crazy. Sorry, I'm
yeah.
just shocked. I'm shocked. Was Tyson in this even or no?
I don't think
Uh,
so, which is
No, I
funny
don't
too
think
because he would
so.
just be on the cover.
he's it says he's in the game.
Oh, he says it, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
Was
remember
this
playing
in
or playing him or playing with him or anything like that.
damn?
But
So would this be
yeah,
like one of the few games where I did they end up getting Tyson for Fight Night? I can't remember. I feel like they did at some point, but like this had to
Eventually,
be,
one of the later ones. They
I
got
feel like
Tyson. I think Tyson and Foreman were both debuted at the same time, and that might have been the second to last one.
okay. Yeah, because this has to be one of the first games then where Tyson's with a real roster of people. This is nuts. This is like Michael Jordan being in an NBA Jam game.
Yeah, and
Crazy.
I never heard of this because I feel like any of this, if we knew this game was out with that type of roster back for Dreamcast, that we are honestly would have bought it immediately, right?
1990. I'm playing this when we're done. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie. I mean, I'm sure it's shit, but I have to know. Like I gotta know.
Please
do you,
reenact Larry
do you have
Holmes, Ken
an
Norton, and tell me how that goes.
do you have an emulator?
That's maybe how I played most of
Yeah.
these games.
I mean,
So
in
I'm not gonna say
theory,
that.
do you theoretically have it?
In theory, I might have used something called RetroArch in theory to play most of these games. Yes.
Fair enough.
Shout out to
Fair enough.
RetroArch.
So the last question to y'all is, um, do you think another fight night is? Do you think EA releases another game eventually?
I think that the
I know
market.
there's been like rumors and talks about it, especially with like in light of
Yeah.
Undisputed coming out and like the attention they got. And I
Mhm.
enjoy the game for what it is. I'm looking forward to their future, like, downloads
Yeah.
for fighters and all that. But do you think that like I guess what I'm just, do you think EA finally says, okay, let's do it?
I think so. I think there's a demand for it. I mean, the fact that there's still a dedicated community to Fight Night Champion tells me that there's people that are
Yeah.
loyal to EA and would buy a game made by EA. Like I think that's a big part of it. I've also got to throw something out there. I think a game that would be similar to Greatest Heavyweights, like a retro type of game, would be really cool. And I think that you could license people for that. And people like retro era stuff. And I think if they went back and looked at Greatest Heavyweights and improved on it, I think that would be so cool. Like I would love to play a game that's like kind of cartoony. I
Uh,
love realistic games and all that, but I think a game like that would be pretty dope.
I mean, look at the adulation that people have for WWF WrestleFest, the arcade game still. You know what I mean? Or like stuff like that. Totally,
Yes.
absolutely.
Walking kind of a narrow path here as much as I can. Um, with Undisputed, I think some of a big portion of the issue was that they seemed to put a lot of their resources toward the motion capture portion of the game, which is great because you have some really good looking characters and really good looking gameplay. In large part because of the mocap they did, which is, like I said, really cool. But it seems like the gameplay suffered for so much being put into the motion capture overall, and then like the concepts of the actual game and like the ideas behind the game. So it's not quite as innovative overall. And so, I mean, I think that maybe if you got EA involved and EA with a little bit more of experience doing those kinds of games, we might be able to actually improve. But for not having a boxing game for so long, Undisputed, thankfully, for a lot of people, has scratched that itch, you know?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I'm grateful they did it.
yeah. And I
It's
love their roster too for what they're, coming out with because again, I it's difficult and I think that's what like pushed and initially pushed EA away, I guess, right? And like strictly went to UFC was
Yeah, and
that
the
you can't you
rights and
it's the rights and everything. Yeah,
yeah,
because
it's
like
a mess.
you're directly
licensing. Yeah,
licensing. Go ahead,
Or yeah,
Aris.
the
licensing
licensing, not
current
the
yeah
rights, yeah.
licensing current fighters is really challenging. I think that's part of it. Is a lot of these guys know their worth and they're not going to just throw it away
Yeah,
for
they got
five
attorneys
grand
involved,
attorneys. So like licensing classic fighters is a lot easier because I learned this when I was doing research that a lot of them they're like I don't know what you call them, licensing houses, but like you can like go and get like on a website and be like, we offer all these dead people and it's like 250 like
Holy
names like
shit.
Ty Cobb and this and that. So that's why a lot of times you can when you license like Marciano, you can that same company, you can license like Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Patterson, that basically Holmes, like you can basically just license like 10 boxers and you can get like a really sweet discount on it. So
right?
that's why on Steam, for example, there's a game called World Champion Boxing Manager, which was a very popular game on the PC back in the day. More of like a simulator E-type game, but they made a sequel that's I don't think the reviews on it are fantastic, so I haven't played it, but they have Marciano and Robinson licensed, and I thought I know how they did that because they went to that licensing place and they got a 2-for-1 package. So that's why a lot of those guys pop into games because if you can decide to, like an Ali or a Frazier, you can have the family take care of the licensing, or you can just sell your rights off to some studio that just basically
Exactly.
throws it out to everybody. So you just,
Muhammad Ali
depends.
is a really good example of that because he did
Right.
that for like everything, where he would just get paid a check for, X amount to sign his likeness or his name or whatever it was to this company for X amount of time for this product. And that's what it is.
Muhammad Ali
Well,
Roach Killer.
you guys will
Yeah, decon, baby.
you guys will find this funny then before we head out is that speaking of like trying to license guys for video games and stuff like that, I remember when I was working for Cedric, so we're talking, I don't know, 2008-ish or something. And I don't remember at that point if there was another like boxing game coming out. I think EA probably had one coming out like a year or so after that. But anyways, some kid called up the office, turns out to be a kid, and he goes, and he was like, oh, he pretended that he was with EA. He was like, oh, I like talk to Cedric about, getting David 2 into the video game and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, Cedric's on the other line, but I'll have him call you back. He called back in like a half an hour, said the same thing, and I put Cedric on. This kid pretended he was a part of EA, and Cedric gets on the phone to start negotiating. Oh, I want a certain amount of money. You write this down as I start negotiating. Turns out I was a fucking fan. The kid just wanted to call up. Literally, he posed as a guy from EA to call up and tell Cedric, hey,
Hell
man, can we
yeah.
get Tua in the game?
Hell yeah. That's fantastic.
Cedric was like, what? You're not with EA? And just hung up the phone. He was like, it's a fucking fine. And I
That
just
kid
walked out.
he went directly to a message board to go report his fucking findings,
Yeah, he's like,
guaranteed.
this is what the rate is to
Yo,
license
All right,
these
guys, let's
people.
crowdfund this.
like Cedric, I remember actually answered the phone. The first thing he said was like, I know how much this is what me worth and how much I want to cut of or something like this for the shit. And the kid was like, nah, I'm just a fan, bro. Can we just get him in the game?
Great. Hell yeah.
Fucking awesome.
Yeah, man.
Fucking boxing and video games go together like lamb and tuna fish, or, spaghetti and meatball, if you're more familiar with this analogy. Look, it's the type of thing where we're all just in that narrow age gap where we all grew up when video games were kind of like developing and like so we've seen almost the entire pantheon, almost the entire lifespan of the actual video game. We weren't none of us were around for that craze in the 70s, but from the early 80s on, we've been there. We've seen it all. And where the fuck it's going, I have no idea. The actual phone apps and stuff like that seem to have taken over a large chunk of the real estate for video games. But the future is now, man. And hopefully EA does develop some stuff. I know that Undisputed is further developing their game, which is great. So I don't know. Either way, I hope that boxing and video games stay fucking partners. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, we got a game out, and guess what? They got Mike McCallum coming out. I'm excited about that one.
Whoa, whoa,
He's
whoa,
one of
whoa.
the. Oh yeah,
What?
He's supposed to be one of the guys coming out in that game on the rosters of.
That's
Because
crazy.
I had to look up because I remember like all
Wow.
these names that haven't been released yet, and then they did that like launch of like the first six dudes or whatever. So I
They have
was like,
like
I'm
packs or
curious.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of their pack. So I was like, I want to see who else hasn't been released on their roster yet, and I was pretty surprised by their names. McCallum was one of them.
That's crazy. Sorry, that one blows my mind. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm really
That's a
excited
good
about
one.
that one.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, you can feel any sort of way you want. We're obviously nostalgic for a lot of the stuff that happened in the 80s and 90s, but things could potentially be looking up in the video game sphere. Either way, Gray, dude, we appreciate you taking the time
No.
to I mean, first of all, you did your hobby, you played some video games, but nonetheless, you still got to report it back and make a spreadsheet and shit. We appreciate that.
Oh, thanks for letting me ramble for 2 hours at you guys. No, I appreciate it. I always love being on the show, and this is a topic I love to discuss. So thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk.
We'll have you back in 2026. No question about that.
When it's time to heat things up again, bring me on in.
Yep, dude. Start getting shit fired up for an idea for then.
Sounds
Eris,
good.
Eris, it's always a good time talking fucking, whatever it
Yeah.
is we talk, whether it's history or video games. Appreciate it, man.
Always.
All right, everybody. I'm not going to go down the entire roster of everybody's social media, but I will say that if you want to find Gray Johnson, he's probably going to be on Twitter. Eris also on Twitter. I'm not really there anymore, but you can find me in other places if you would like. I'll put the little list underneath the YouTube and the podcast, all that sort of thing. But everybody who listen in or watch, we do appreciate you. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Have a good one.